I've always been a fan of people watching. There's so much to take in: how they dress, walk, converse, and act when they're either around or not around others. At a busy cafe, or at a diner like this, it's fun to see personalities collide like particles in an accelerator, to observe a guy's personality change when he switches from talking to his friend to chatting up the waitress, to watch the personalities of waitstaff shift when serving each table, adapting to large families, young couples. In focusing on other people, I've made a lot of observations about what those people are focusing on. In any given moment, we are all focusing on something, even if we're just lost in our internal thoughts. Let's take a glance through the diner. I turn my attention first to the two 20-something girls at the table to my left, who are mostly focusing on their smartphones instead of each other. Between bouts of texting, they flip their phones face down on the table. This, it seems, is a pretty pointless gesture. They've picked them back up 30 seconds later. While I can't make out their every word, I can tell they're skimming the surface of the conversation they could be having. They're with each other in person, but their attention is elsewhere. Or take the couple across the room. They're engrossed in a conversation fueled by hot coffee and buttermilk pancakes. They were engaged in relatively quiet small talk when they arrived, but their conversation soon became more animated. Unlike the girls, this couple has focused only on each other since sitting down. A catchy Ed Sheeran song comes on over the restaurant's speakers, and my attention is drawn to the two guys sitting a few tables over from the couple. One of them subtly taps his foot to the beat while his friend orders. The foot tapper is presumably spreading his attention across three things: the song, what his friend is ordering, and his own breakfast decision. After he orders the 3-egg express, when the server asks how he'd like his eggs prepared, he directs his attention inward, seemingly recalling how he usually takes them. He orders scrambled. At the bar are a few strangers making idle conversation while watching last night's football highlights. I find it especially fascinating that millions of people around the world, including these three guys, are fixated on an 11-inch piece of tanned cowhide. As I watch, one of the guys cocks his head, lost in thought. Then, as though a shockwave was traveling through his body, he rushes to capture an idea in his pocketed notepad. While he was lost in a daydream, and to the tune of football highlights, an insight struck from out of the blue. He had a eureka moment. 14, or take me, sitting here with my laptop. This morning, as I sip coffee and nibble home fries, I've been able to focus more deeply on my work and have more energy to burn. My morning meditation may have helped. I find I'm able to write more words when I take part in this ritual, 40% more, by my calculations. I left my phone at home so I could write distraction-free, and so my mind could rest on the walk to the diner, and wander. As I'll discuss later, disconnecting is one of the most powerful ways to spark new and innovative ideas. The music playing on the restaurant speakers is catchy, but not enough to be distracting. I'm not here for the soundtrack, though, and also chose this diner over my favorite cafe because there's no Wi-Fi. Constant connectivity is one of the worst disruptions to our focus and productivity. As the last few paragraphs demonstrate, I am a bit distracted by the environment and the people it's hosting, but they're serving as good fodder for this introduction. This restaurant scene is a handy illustration of a revelation I had a while back: attention is all around us. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Everyone awake on the planet, in this one moment, whether they're eating breakfast, working, or spending time with their family, is focused on something. Attention is the backdrop against which we live our lives wherever we go and whatever we do, even if we're just noticing the thoughts in our head. It has been a few years since I first began to explore how we can not only focus better but also think more clearly. While this is tough to admit, especially as someone who was making his living as a productivity expert, I started to notice my own increased distraction, especially as I accumulated more devices. I had never been so busy while accomplishing so little. I had grown restless with boredom and a lack of stimulation and was trying to cram as much into every moment as I could. I knew that my brain never functioned well when I was trying to multitask, but I felt compelled to do it anyway. Working with my email client open and my smartphone on my desk was simply more appealing than trying to concentrate on one or two simple things. For me, this book was born out of necessity. I wrote it because I needed it. When I get excited by a new idea, I typically order dozens of books on it and nerd out about that topic. Focus has been my most recent fascination. This includes how we can best manage the distractions around us, multitask more effectively, if that's possible, it is, battle our resistance to focusing on tasks that make us procrastinate, and also better unfocus so that we can genuinely relax and recharge. In my reading, I found an awful lot of information advice, often contradictory, that was fun to read but ultimately didn't help me progress my work and life forward. I then turned to the actual scientific research scores of academic studies and decades of documentation dedicated to learning how we best focus. As I carefully read every study I could find, the focus folder on my computer became massive. I amassed tens of thousands of words of notes and began to identify the most practical, tactical lessons from them. I started speaking to the world's foremost attention, 15. Researchers to get to the bottom of why we get distracted so easily and discover how we can get our stubborn minds to focus in a world of distraction. And I started to experiment with the research myself, to see if it was actually possible to get a grip on my focus. What I discovered completely changed not only how I work but also how I live my life. I began to see focus as not only a contributor to my productivity but also a factor in my overall well-being. Surprisingly, I learned that one of the best practices for fostering my creativity and productivity was learning how to unfocus. By paying attention to nothing in particular and letting my mind wander as I did on my way to the Kingston diner, I found that I became better at making connections between ideas and coming up with new ones. I also found that we encounter more distraction today than we have in the entire history of humanity. Studies show we can work for an average of just 40 seconds in front of a computer before we're either distracted or interrupted. Needless to say, we do our best work when we attend to a task for a lot longer than 40 seconds. I went from viewing multitasking as a stimulating work hack to regarding it as a trap of continuous interruptions. While trying to do more tasks simultaneously, we prevent ourselves from finishing any one task of significance. And I began to discover that by focusing deeply on just one important thing at a time, hyperfocusing, we become the most productive version of ourselves. Above all else, I began to view attention as the most important ingredient we can add if we're to become more productive, creative, and happy at work and at home. When we invest our limited attention intelligently and deliberately, we focus more deeply and think more clearly. This is an essential skill in today's world, when we are so often in distracting environments doing brain-heavy knowledge work. This book takes you on a guided tour through my exploration of the subject of focus. I'll share not only the fascinating things I've learned but also how to actually put those ideas to use in your own life. I've road-tested all of them. Productivity research is great but pretty useless when you don't act upon it. In this way, I see Hyperfocus as a sort of science help book, one that explores the fascinating research behind how you focus but also bridges those insights with your daily life to explore ways you can manage your attention better to become more productive and creative. These ideas have already changed one life, mine, and I know they can do the same for you too. On the surface, the results can seem a bit like magic, but magic stops being magic the moment you know how it's done. 16, 17, 18. Chapter 0.5 How to better focus. On this book are eating. This book is your first chance to put your focus to the test, and the more attention you can dedicate to it, the more you'll get out of the time spent on it. Let's begin on a practical note with 7 ways to focus more deeply while reading. But first, a quick comment. If I've learned one thing from my research, it's that productivity is highly personal. Everyone is uniquely wired and has different routines. As a result, not all productivity tactics will mesh comfortably with your life. Not to mention the fact that you may simply not want to follow some of the advice I offer. Experiment with as many of these focus tactics as you can, and adopt whatever works for you. 1. Put your phone out of sight when your mind is even slightly resisting a task. It will look for more novel things to focus on. Our smartphones are a great example. They provide an endless stream of bite-sized, delicious information for our brains to consume. As I'll discuss later, distractions and interruptions are infinitely easier to deal with before they become a temptation. Start seeing your smartphone for what it really is, a productivity black hole that sits in your pocket. To focus on this book, I recommend leaving your device in another room. It may take your brain a few minutes to adjust to not having your phone or pad attached at your hip, but trust me, it's worth powering through that initial resistance. It's never healthy to be dependent on something addictive, shiny rectangular devices included. Here's a fun experiment to dive deeper into this idea. Over the span of a day or two, pay attention to the number of times you instinctively pull out your phone. How are you feeling, and what compels you to reach for it? Are you trying to distract yourself during a long elevator ride? Are you avoiding a boring task, like updating your quarterly budget? By noting the times you habitually reach for your phone, you'll gain insight into which tasks you resist the most and how you're feeling in those moments. 2. Mind your environment. Look up and around you. Where are you reading this book? How likely are you to be distracted or interrupted as you read, and is there a place you could go to avoid those distractions? Or are you reading in an environment where you don't have much control, such as on the train or the subway? 19. Modifying your environment is one of the top ways to cultivate your focus. The most focus-conducive environments are those in which you're interrupted and distracted the least. If possible, move yourself to one of these places, whether it's a cafe down the street, the library, or a quieter room in the house. 3. Make a distractions list. Distractions will always be present, even if you manage to find a reading spot in a Japanese Zen garden with your phone far away. External distractions aren't the only ones to blame. Think of the distractions that can come internally, like your brain reminding you that you need to pick up groceries. Whenever I have to focus, I adopt the 2 tactics mentioned above, and I also bring a pen and a notepad with me. In the notepad I write every distraction that makes its way into my mind, things I need to follow up on, tasks I can't forget, new ideas, and so on. Maintaining a distractions list as you read will capture the important things that float to the surface of your consciousness. Writing them down to make sure they don't slip through the cracks will let you refocus on the task at hand. 4. Question whether this book is worth consuming at all. We consume a lot of things out of habit, without questioning their worth, books included. Take time to weigh the value of your routine consumption. A tactic I find helpful is to view the descriptions of books, TV shows, podcasts, and everything else as pitches for your time and attention. Ask yourself, after consuming one of those products, will you be happy with how you invested your time and attention? Just as you are what you eat, you are what you pay attention to. Attention is finite and is the most valuable ingredient you have to live a good life, so make sure everything you consume is worthy of it. As I'll cover in depth later, bringing awareness to what you consume can provide hours of extra time each day. 5. Consume some caffeine before reading. If it's not too late in the day, caffeine takes 8 to 14 hours to metabolize out of your system. Consider reading alongside a cup of coffee or tea. Caffeine provides an invaluable focus boost, and while you usually have to pay this energy back later in the day as the drug metabolizes out of your system, the costs are often worth it. Caffeine boosts your mental and physical performance in virtually every measurable way, more on this page. Use this energy boost wisely to work on an important task or to read this book. 20-6. Grab a pen or highlighter. There are 2 ways to consume information, passively and actively. One of my many habits that bother my fiancée is that I tear out the first page of every book I read to use as a bookmark. She argues this is sacrilegious. I say there are more copies of the same book at the store. This is only the start of the carnage. I also read with a highlighter and a pen in hand so I can mark up the book as I read it. The number of highlights and notes on its pages indicates how much I liked it. When I finish that first read, I go through the book a second time, rereading just the highlighted parts so I can really process the most valuable nuggets. If I can, I'll annoy someone nearby by sharing these bits so I can process them again even more deeply. I hope that while reading Hyperfocus you'll highlight and underline away, pulling the best ideas off its pages and carrying them in your mind to build and act upon later. If I've done a good job in writing it, you'll have made a large number of notes. Please email me a picture of your finished work of art. I'd love to see it. My email, and other ways to contact me, are at the back of the book. 7. When you notice your focus wavering. Your ability to focus isn't limitless. While you can improve your attention span, it's only a matter of time until it begins to waver. This often takes the form of your mind wandering away from the words on the page to the thoughts in your head. This is perfectly normal and human, and, as we'll see later, this wandering can be remarkably powerful when harnessed. For now, though, when you do notice your focus fading, step back from this book for a few minutes to do something relatively mindless. Whether it's washing the dishes, people watching, or cleaning the house, you'll effectively recharge your attention. Once your focus has been reset, return to the book with a fresh mind. And just as you've kept a distractions list while you read, make sure you have a place to capture ideas that come to mind during your break. 21, 22, 23, Part I Hyperfocus, 24, 25, 26, 27, Chapter 1 Switching off autopilot mode. Autopilot mode. Right now there's a good chance that you're focused on this book. But how did you get here? Looking at the books in my own library, I learned about most of them through recommendations from friends, podcast appearances by the author, or having loved a similar book. Most of us don't deliberately plot out which element of our lives we want to improve before settling on a book that will help us address that issue. We often arrive at those reading decisions because of a confluence of events. Take, for example, the last book I read. One day I was riding in a taxi whose driver had the radio on, and I heard an interview with the author. Later, a friend tweeted about that book twice. This accumulation of mentions led to my eventual decision to buy the book. The process as a whole was anything but deliberate. Our not plotting out in detail everything we do and every decision we make is, for the most part, a good thing. I made the series of decisions involved in purchasing many of my books in autopilot mode. Autopilot mode enables us to keep up with the demands of our life. For example, imagine if every email response required you to draft your answer in a new Word document. From there, you'd have to reread it several times, send it to your significant other for improvements, and print it once or twice to do line edits, only to arrive several hours later at a final, eloquent "sure, sounds good." This might be a productive thing to do for an important project, but for every email? Imagine being just as deliberate buying ketchup, taking out the trash, or brushing your teeth. Autopilot mode guides us through actions like these. As many as 40% of our actions are habits, which shouldn't require conscious deliberation. Unless you're a monk and have the luxury of being able to meditate all day, it's impossible to live intentionally 100% of the time. But some decisions are worth making deliberately. How we manage our attention is one of them. We typically manage our attention on autopilot. When we receive an email from our boss, we instinctively stop what we're doing to respond to it. When someone has posted a picture of us online, we check to see how we look, then click to read what the poster said about us. When we're talking with a coworker or a loved one, we automatically focus on forming clever responses in our head before she finishes her thought. One of the most underrated skills, letting other people finish their sentences before starting yours. Here's a simple exercise that'll take you 30 seconds. Come up with an honest answer to this question: throughout the day, how frequently do you choose what to, 28, focus on? In other words, roughly how much of your time do you spend deliberately and with intention, deciding in advance what you want to do and when you'll do it? Most people don't fare too well with their answers. We lead busy lives, and at most we only occasionally choose to focus on something intentionally when we catch ourselves daydreaming, sense that we've been procrastinating, fall into the trap of bouncing around the same several apps or websites, or realize we've zoned out while watching our kids. After we snap out of autopilot mode, we consider what we really ought to be doing and make the effort to realign our neurons to focus on that instead. While falling into autopilot mode can help us keep up the pace of work and life, attention is our most limited and constrained resource. The more we can manage our attention with intention, the more focused, productive, and creative we become. A day in autopilot mode. The environments in which we live and work, unfortunately, have their own agenda for claiming our attention, bombarding us with alerts, notifications, beeps, and buzzes. This steady stream of interruptions prevents us from diving into any one thing properly. After all, it isn't long before we're presented with another email that feels just as urgent. If you're still here, you're probably better at focusing than the average person. Reading a book requires a good deal of attention, and with attention becoming a rare commodity, fewer people are able to devote themselves to reading without distraction. But it's worth quickly asking, how much of your attention are you directing to this paragraph in this moment? Are you focused on it 100%? 85%? 50%? How has your level of focus changed over time, especially as you moved from one environment to another? How frequently has your mind wandered from the words on this page to the thoughts in your head, scheming focus free until you caught yourself and tuned back in? Even the most experienced, focused readers have these mind-wandering episodes. It's not unusual to have a hard time focusing. There are countless everyday examples of how little control we have over our attention in our daily lives. Take, for example, the following: how our mind refuses to shut off when we're lying in bed at night. While a large part of us wants to sleep because we have things to do in the morning, our mind insists on reliving the entire day. How our mind brings up cringe-worthy memories at the worst possible times. Where do these thoughts come from? How incredible ideas and insights come to us while our mind is wandering in the shower, but the same insights don't strike when we need them the most. How we find ourselves having forgotten our reason for entering the kitchen or bedroom. Why did we lose our grip on our original intention? How we can't focus on something when we want to, like writing a report that's not on a deadline. Or why we procrastinate and focus on things that aren't productive instead of spending our time productively. 29. How we find ourselves in bed bouncing around a loop of the same 5 smartphone apps, checking for updates again and again until we snap out of our trance. We may fall into a similar mindless loop on the internet, switching between news websites, IM conversations, and social media. How we're unable to stop worrying about certain things until they're resolved or vanish into the ether. As you read Hyperfocus and learn to focus more deliberately, these lapses will make a lot more sense, and you'll even learn how to prevent them. The 4 types of tasks. In many ways, managing your attention is like choosing what to watch on Netflix. When you first launch the website, you're presented with a landing page highlighting just a few of the many shows that are available. The Netflix homepage is like a fork in the road, only instead of 2 paths forward, there are thousands. Taking some of those paths will leave you feeling happy, some will mindlessly entertain you, and others will teach you something useful. Deciding where to direct our attention presents a similar fork in the road, only the pathways lead to the innumerable things on which we can choose to focus. Right now you're absorbed in this book. But if you look up from this page or your e-reader, you'll see many alternative objects of attention. Some are more meaningful and productive than others. Focusing on this book is probably more productive than focusing on your smartphone, the wall, or the music in the background. If you're grabbing breakfast with a friend, focusing on him or her is infinitely more rewarding than watching the football highlights playing in the background. When you tally up all of the potential things on which you could focus in your external environment, there is truly an overwhelming number of options. And that's not even counting the trivia, ideas, and memories in your own head. This is the problem with managing your attention on autopilot mode. The most urgent and stimulating things in your environment are rarely the most significant. This is why switching off autopilot mode is so critical. Directing your attention toward the most important object of your choosing and then sustaining that attention is the most consequential decision we will make throughout the day. We are what we pay attention to. To make sense of all of the things bidding for our focus, it's helpful to divide our tasks into categories. I'll discuss focus here largely as it pertains to work, but these rules apply just as much to your life at home, as several sections later in the book will explore. There are two main criteria to consider when categorizing what to focus on: whether a task is productive, you accomplish a lot by doing it, and whether a task is attractive, fun to do, or unattractive, boring, frustrating, difficult, etc. 30. I'll refer to this grid quite often, so let's quickly take a look at each of the four categories of tasks. Necessary work includes tasks that are unattractive yet productive. Team meetings and calls about your quarterly budget fall into this quadrant. We usually have to push ourselves to do this type of work. Unnecessary work includes the tasks that are both unproductive and unattractive, like rearranging the papers on your desk or the files on your computer. We usually don't bother with these tasks unless we're procrastinating on doing something else or resisting a task that falls into the necessary work or purposeful work categories. Spending time on unnecessary work tasks keeps us busy, but such busyness is just an active form of laziness when it doesn't lead to actually accomplishing anything. Distracting work includes stimulating, unproductive tasks and as such is a black hole for productivity. It includes social media, most IM conversations, news websites, water cooler chats, and every other form of low-return distraction. These activities can be fun but should generally be indulged in small doses. The better you become at managing your attention, the less time you'll spend in this quadrant. The remaining box on the chart is purposeful work, the productivity sweet spot. These are the tasks we're put on earth to do, the tasks we're most engaged in as we do them, the tasks with which we make the largest impact. Very few tasks fit into this box. Most people I've encountered have 3 or 4 at most. Doing good work in this category usually requires more brain power, and we are often better at these types of tasks than other people are. An actor's most purposeful tasks might be to rehearse and perform. A financial advisor's purposeful tasks might be to make investments, meet with 31 clients, and educate herself on industry trends. A researcher's most important tasks might include designing and running studies, teaching, and applying for funding. My most important tasks are writing books and blog articles, reading research to encounter new ideas, and giving talks. In your personal life, your purposeful tasks might include spending time with your kids, working on a side hustle, or volunteering with a local charity. A perfectly productive person would focus on only the top 2 quadrants of the above chart. If things were that simple, though, you wouldn't need this book. As you've no doubt experienced, sticking within the borders of necessary and purposeful work is much easier said than done. Every day, tasks from all 4 quadrants compete for our attention. Working on autopilot means we are more prone to falling prey to the unnecessary and distracting ones, and often spend time on necessary and purposeful work only when we're on deadline. I noticed something interesting as I applied the research in this book to my own life. As time passed, I began to spend less time on autopilot and focused more attention on my most purposeful and necessary tasks. As you become more deliberate about managing your attention, I think you'll find the same to be true for your work. Here's an immediate way to improve your productivity. Divide up your work tasks based on the 4 categories in the above grid. This simple activity will give you an incredible awareness of what's actually important in your work. Because I'll return to the grid often going forward, divvying up your work activities will be valuable as you make your way through the book. 32, 33, 34, Chapter 2: The Limits of Your Attention Without Selective Interest. Experience is utter chaos. William James. Your focus determines your reality. Qui-Gon Jinn, Star Wars, Episode 1, the phantom menace the boundaries of your attention. Our attention is the most powerful tool we have to live a good life and get stuff done, but our ability to focus is constrained in two main ways. First, there's a finite limit to how many things we can focus on. That limit is smaller than you might think. If we could actually focus on more tasks simultaneously, we'd be able to do far more in the moment, memorizing someone's phone number while playing the piano, carrying on a conversation with two people, and responding to an email on our phone. Realistically, we can, at most, do one or two of these things well at the same time. Our environment sends a steady stream of information to our brain every second. Think about the sights, sounds, and other information coming at you in this moment, and you'll realize there is a nearly infinite number of items at which you could direct your focus. Timothy Wilson, a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia, estimates that our brain receives 11 million bits of information in the form of sensory experiences each second. But how many of these 11 million bits can our minds consciously process and focus on at once? Just 40 of them. Not 40 million or 40,000, but 40. When we choose what to focus on, we're effectively sipping from a fire hose. One conversation, for example, consumes the majority of our attentional bits, which is why we can't carry on two at once. According to renowned psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, simply decoding a conversation, so we can understand it, consumes more than half of our attention. As well as interpreting a person's words, you have to parse the meaning behind what he or she is saying. While you're conversing, there are countless other places to direct your remaining attentional bits: your work tasks for tomorrow, random thoughts in your head, the lamp behind your partner, the timbre of her voice, or what you're going to say next. But extracting the meaning of what you're hearing is the best use of your focus. 35. The second way that our attention is limited is that after focusing on something, we can hold only a small amount of information in our short-term memory. The ability to temporarily store information in our minds is practically a superpower, as it's what enables us to think about what we're doing as we're doing it, whether that involves problem-solving tasks, e.g., carrying over digits when doing arithmetic, or planning for the future, e.g., plotting the best sequence of exercises at the gym. Without this temporary mental scratchpad, we'd be mindlessly reacting to whatever was happening in the world around us. When it comes to holding information in our temporary memory, though, the magic number of which our brain is capable shrinks from 40 to 4. Try to memorize the following list of names and then write them down: Arthur, Rick, Ryan, Lucinda, Louise, Martin, Kelsey, Sini, Sod, White, Bryce. When asked to write the names they remember, some people are able to recall only 3, while others can manage 5, 6, or even 7. The average number, he can use this concept of chunking things though, is 4. In this context, the number 4 refers to together to better remember any number of practical unique chunks of information. 4 things throughout the day. This morning I was listening. Example: if you can find a way to connect to an audiobook while getting groceries, difficult a few of the names into such chunks combination to do simultaneously. I needed to buy such as visualizing a few friends who have 3 things: celery, hummus, and crackers. When I the same names as the ones on the list walked into the store, I visualized a triangle with the you'll be able to process them more location of each of the 3 items as one of its points. Deeply and remember more. In my case, I, instead of struggling to remember my grocery list, can remember all 10 names and still have independently, I was able to walk the triangle. Room to spare. I'm not some super genius, visualizing a meal consisting of the same 3 though. To create the list I picked, the ingredients would have done the trick too, and is names of the 10 people I emailed the probably an even simpler idea. Most this week, which enabled me to effortlessly group them together for memory's sake. Our lives are generally structured around the fact that we're able to hold, at most, 7 pieces of unique information in our short-term memory. You need look no further than the world around you to see evidence of how we organize data into mentally orderly units. Start with the number 2. There are countless examples in pop culture, 36, that show the power of the pair. We can easily hold two things in memory at once, so it's no accident that combinations of two are found everywhere, from dynamic duos like Batman and Robin to Bert and Ernie to Calvin and Hobbes. The number 3 also fits comfortably in our attentional space. We award 3 Olympic medals and grow up with stories like Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, the 3 Blind Mice, and the 3 Little Pigs. The list goes on. We divide these stories into 3 parts, the beginning, middle, and end, and have sayings like good things come in threes, celebrities die in threes, and third time's the charm. We also group ideas into 4s, the 4 seasons, 5s, the 5 love languages, 6s, the 6 sides of a die, and 7s, days of the week, deadly sins, and wonders of the world. Even most phone numbers fit comfortably within this attentional limit, one set of 3 numbers, or maybe 4, if you're in the United Kingdom, followed by another 4 digits, making the full number easy to hold in your mind as you dial. You have to dig deep to find common examples of groups larger than 7. Meet your attentional space. Attentional space is the term I use to describe the amount of mental capacity we have available to focus on and process things in the moment. Our attentional space is what we're aware of at any given time. It's the scratch pad or clipboard in our brain that we use to temporarily store information as it's being processed. Attentional space allows to us hold, manipulate, and connect information simultaneously, and on the fly. When we choose what to pay attention to, that information occupies our short-term memory, and our attentional space ensures it's kept active so we can continue to work with it. Together, our focus and attentional space are responsible for most of our conscious experiences. If your brain were a computer, your attentional space would be its RAM. Technically speaking, researchers refer to this space as our working memory and the size of this space as our working memory capacity. We'll discuss attentional space in considerable depth in Hyperfocus. Given that this space is so small and can hold only a few things at once, it's essential we manage it well. Even when we're daydreaming and focusing on nothing in particular, we fill our attentional space. When we focus on a conversation we're having, that conversation claims our complete attentional space, at least when it's interesting. Streaming a video while cooking dinner crams both these tasks into our attentional space. When we retrieve a memory or fact, like a friend's birthday or the name of a song, from our long-term memory, this information is temporarily loaded into our attentional space for when we need it. The space holds everything that you're aware of. It's your entire conscious world. 37. I find reading and the science that studies how it fills attentional space a particularly fascinating subject. If you're truly paying attention to the words on this page, you have almost no attentional space remaining for other tasks. Just as you don't have, 38, sufficient attentional space to both text and drive, you can't text while you read. Either of these two tasks alone requires too much focus to fit comfortably in your attentional space. At best, you might be able to drink a cup of coffee while reading, but there's a chance it could get cold if you become too immersed in the text, or you might spill some on the book when you try, and fail, to do both. As you read, your brain is hard at work converting the raw bits of perceptual information into facts, stories, and lessons that you remember and internalize. After your eyes register the waves of light emanating from the page, your mind generates words from them. These words temporarily fill your attentional space. You then begin connecting the words to form syntactic units and clauses, the fundamental building blocks of sentences. Finally, using your attentional space as a scratch pad, your brain groups those combinations of words together into complete ideas so you can extract their higher level meaning. Sentence structure can influence this process and slow down or speed up how quickly you read. Much as the world doesn't combine many groups of data into sets greater than 7, every book is structured to accommodate a reader's restricted attentional space. Sentences have a limited length and are punctuated by commas, semicolons, and dashes. According to one study, the period at the end of a sentence is the point when our attentional space stops being loaded, and what has been present in it up to that moment must be in some way stored in a summarized form in a short-term memory. Your attention is constantly synced to what you're reading or doing. Here's an interesting example: you even blink in accordance with where your attention is directed. You normally blink 15 to 20 times a minute, but do so during natural breaks in your attention, such as at the end of a sentence when reading, when someone you're speaking with pauses, or at breakpoints when watching a video. This blinking rhythm happens automatically. All you have to do is pay attention to what you're reading, and your brain's attentional space takes care of the rest. What's filling your attentional space? Let's do a quick check-in. What's occupying your attentional space at this moment? In other words, what's on your mind? Are this book and your thoughts about it consuming 100% of your attentional space? If so, you'll process it faster and better. Are you devoting a third of your attention to thinking about the smartphone by your side? Is part of your mind planning what you'll do after completing this chapter, or distracted by something you're worried about? Are these concerns or anxieties popping out of nowhere? Directing your mental gaze to what is currently occupying your attentional space can be an odd exercise, as we rarely notice what has taken hold of our attention but spend most of our time totally immersed in what we're experiencing. There's a term for this process: meta-awareness. Becoming aware of what you're thinking about is one of the best practices for managing your attention. The more you notice what's occupying your 39 attentional space, the faster you can get back on track when your mind begins to wander, which it does a remarkable 47% of the time. Whether you're writing an email, taking part in a conference call, watching a TV show, or having dinner with your family, you're essentially spending half of your time and attention on what's not in front of you, lost in the past or calculating the future. That's a lot of time and attention to waste. While there is immense value in letting your mind scatter, most times we'd do better to focus on the present. This is essentially what mindfulness is: noticing what your mind is full of, what you're thinking, feeling, and perceiving at any given moment. Mindfulness adds another important dimension to the mix: not judging what you're thinking about. When you become aware of what is occupying your mind, you realize it can come up with some pretty crazy stuff, not all of which is true, like the negative self-talk that sometimes takes root in your head. Everyone's mind does this on some level, so you shouldn't sweat it too much or take all of your thoughts too seriously. As one of my favorite writers, David Kane, puts it, all thoughts want to be taken seriously, but few warrant it. Simply noticing what is occupying our attentional space has been shown to make us more productive. One study asked participants to read a detective novel and try to solve the crime. It compared readers whose minds wandered without awareness with those whose minds wandered consciously. Solve rates were substantially higher for the group that was aware that their minds had wandered. We perform significantly better on every task when we're aware that our mind is wandering. If you pay attention to what's on your mind, which is admittedly hard to do for more than a minute or so, you'll notice that the content of your attentional space is constantly changing. You'll understand that it truly is a scratch pad, with thoughts, tasks, conversations, projects, daydreams, conference calls, and other objects of attention continually passing through. You'll also find that your attentional space expands and shrinks depending on your mood. Objects of attention fade from this space just as quickly as they came, usually without your awareness. For all the power it provides, the content of your attentional space is ephemeral. Its memory lasts for an average of just 10 seconds. Tasks that pair well. So what exactly can fit comfortably within attentional space? Tasks take different amounts of attentional space depending on their complexity. A meaningful conversation, as opposed to a casual one, fills up most, if not all, of it. That conversation will suffer as a result of trying to cram too many other things into your attentional space. When you leave your phone on the table during a conversation, for example, you're bound to be distracted by the possibility of incoming messages. Not all tasks require this much attentional space. There are two kinds of tasks in our life and work: habits, which we can perform without much thought and require minimal attentional space, and complex tasks, which can be done well only with dedicated focus. Many experts argue that we can't multitask, which is often true for tasks that require focus to do properly and thus occupy a larger amount of attentional space. But, 40, the same is not true for habits. In fact, we're able to multitask surprisingly well with habits. Though we may not be able to carry on 2 conversations simultaneously, we can walk, breathe, and chew bubblegum while we listen to an audiobook, the last task being one that will easily occupy what's left of our attention. Habitual tasks like cutting your nails, doing the laundry, archiving emails you've already read, and grocery shopping don't require nearly as much attention as more complex tasks. This makes it possible to multitask without compromising the quality of your actions. Every Sunday I like to lump my personal, relatively rote maintenance tasks together, tasks that help me maintain who I am, like preparing meals, trimming my nails, and cleaning the house, and do them all in an allotted period of time while listening to podcasts or an audiobook. It's easily one of my favorite weekly rituals. You can do the same, for example, on your daily commute. If you listen to an audiobook during that routine, hour-long trip, you'll be able to read an extra book each week by utilizing the attention freed by a habitual task. Habits take up very little attentional space, because they take little thought once we get going with them. As cognitive neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene, author of Consciousness and the Brain, told me, if you think of habits such as playing the piano, dressing, shaving, or driving on a familiar route, these are so automatic that they do not seem to prevent any conscious thought. He says that while habits like these may require some level of conscious initiation, once we begin the behavior, the rest of the process takes care of itself. We may need to make conscious decisions occasionally, such as when we're getting dressed and our usual Tuesday outfit is in the wash, but after that intervention we can switch back to the rest of the habit sequence without much thought. Dehaene believes that this process is presumably driven by sequence-related activity in the brain. The brain even assists when we try to do more than one habitual thing simultaneously, by rerouting blood flow away from the prefrontal cortex, the brain's logic center, to the basal ganglia, which helps us run through the habitual sequences of daily routines. 41. Our attentional space can process even more when we're working on unrelated tasks. Take sorting and putting away the laundry while talking on the phone, for example. These activities tap into several senses: sorting laundry into our motor and visual senses, the phone call into our auditory sense. Because we use different brain regions to process them, the tasks aren't competing for the same mental resources. There is a tipping point to attentional space. Of course, doing too many habitual tasks at the same time will cause your attentional space to become overloaded. This is especially true if what you're doing isn't totally automatic and requires frequent mental intervention. Ultimately, the point is this: the number of habitual tasks we can fit into our attentional space is much higher than the number of demanding ones. Tasks that we can't do out of habit, such as reading a book, having a deep conversation, or preparing a progress report for our boss, consume significantly more attentional space, because doing them well demands that we consciously manipulate information on the fly. If we tried carrying on a conversation with our significant other out, 42, of habit, we'd probably not process or remember it and find ourselves falling back on statements like "yes, dear." If you divided your work tasks into the 4 categories I described in Chapter 1, this page, an activity I highly recommend because I'll be referencing it later, you'll notice that your most necessary and purposeful tasks can't be done out of habit. This is exactly what makes these tasks so productive. You accomplish more in doing them because they require focus and brainpower and take advantage of unique skill sets. Anyone can do mindless work out of habit. This is one of the many reasons why distracting tasks are so costly. While these tasks are attractive and stimulating, think watching Netflix after a long day at the office instead of grabbing dinner with a friend, they steal precious time from your most productive work. Spending time on our most productive tasks means we usually have very little attention to spare, if there's any left at all. 43. Unlike habitual tasks, we aren't able to fit 2 complex activities into our attentional space at the same time. Remember, we can focus only on 40 bits of information, and a single complex task requires most of these bits, and on top of this limit, we can process only so much at one time. Since even moderately complex tasks consume most of our attention, we're at best able to pair something habitual with a more complex task. 44. There is no easy way to predict how much attentional space a task will consume. For example, driving will demand much less if you're an expert than if you're a driver's ed student. You're better able to chunk together information on the fly when you have experience with a given task, which provides more freedom to focus on other things. Another variable is the actual size of your attentional space, a measure that's different for everyone. 45. In summary, there are generally three combinations of tasks that fit comfortably within your attentional space. 1. A few small, habitual tasks we're able to breathe while we run, pay attention to our heart rate, and enjoy music all at the same time. As mentioned earlier, initiating these habits requires attention, and 46. Then another attention boost if we need to intervene to stay on track, or, if we're listening to music, to change the track. 2. A task that requires most of our focus, as well as a habitual task. Our attentional space is powerful, but it's also very limited. At best, we can do one small, habitual task plus one other activity that requires most of our attention. 2 examples: listening to a podcast or audiobook while doing maintenance tasks, or playing a simple, repetitive video game on a phone while listening to an audiobook. Filling the rest of your attentional space with habitual, mindless tasks is often not the best way to use spare attention, so when possible, avoid loading it to the brim. 3. One complex task. Your most productive tasks, the ones that enable you to accomplish significantly more for every minute you dedicate to them, fall into this category. The more time and attention you spend on these tasks, the more productive you become. The amount of attentional space consumed by complex tasks varies over time. While carrying on a discussion with your boss, for example, your attentional space may shrink and expand rhythmically to match the content of the conversation, allowing your mind both to wander and to focus on the conversation when it becomes more complex. In a team meeting, you could, in an instant, go from being a passive observer to getting called on for a progress update. Having some attentional space to spare during complex tasks allows you to do two things: it leaves room to reflect on the best approach to completing the task, so you can work smarter and avoid autopilot mode. You'll be able to come up with ideas you might not have had if you were filling your attention to the brim, such as the realization that you could scrap the introduction of the presentation you're going to give and instead dive directly to the point. Leaving some space also enables you to work with a greater awareness of where you should be directing your attention in the first place. That means you can better refocus when your mind inevitably wanders from the task at hand. At the same time, you have attentional space to spare if the task suddenly becomes even more complex. Attention overload. Fitting the right amount and type of tasks into attentional space is both an art and an investment in productivity. The costs of overloading our attention can be pretty severe. Have you ever walked into your kitchen or living room and realized you've forgotten why you went there in the first place? You've fallen into an attention overload trap. You tried to cram too many things into your attentional space: the TV show that was playing, 47, in the background, random thoughts, and the IMDb page you just read, and didn't have enough space left for your original intention. In this case, you meant to grab the grocery list your partner left on the dining room table. The same thing happens when work problems weigh on your mind as you drive home from the office. In this situation, your mind may be even more full, decoding and processing the talk show on the radio while ruminating on what happened at work that day, while running through the multiple habit sequences that let you drive home largely on autopilot mode. If you had planned on buying bread on the way, chances are you won't have enough space to accommodate even that small, simple intention. You'll arrive home feeling overwhelmed, and only in the morning will you open the bread drawer and remember the previous day's task. We have to work with intention as much as possible. This is especially true when we have more to do than time within which to do it. Intention enables us to prioritize so we don't overload our attentional space. Doing so also leaves us feeling more calm, Just as you likely feel uncomfortable after overeating, stuffing your attentional space with too many tasks can make you feel unsettled. At any one time, your attentional space should hold at most two key things that you are processing, what you intend to accomplish and what you're currently doing. This isn't possible 100% of the time, especially as you become immersed in a task, but by being mindful of your intention, you can be confident that what you're immersed in is what you're actually aiming to get done. 48. If you find yourself responding to important work in autopilot mode, chances are you're trying to cram too much into your attentional space. By not stepping back to deliberately manage your attention, you allow it to overflow. Some familiar examples: taking care of your toddler while shopping, trying to walk and text at the same time. Just this morning I watched someone bump into a mailbox because they were trying to do this. Rewinding a movie, TV show, or audiobook because someone was talking to you or because you simply zoned out for a while. Adding baking soda instead of baking powder to a recipe, because you were ruminating on something or watching TV. Leaving a theater with a stomachache, because you didn't have enough attention left to notice you'd eaten too much popcorn. Forgetting to put the divider on the grocery store checkout belt for the next person, like the lady in front of me forgot to do this morning as she flipped through a magazine. You've probably experienced many similar moments. Some are impossible to avoid, because life often presents us with unexpected surprises. But many are possible to circumvent, and noticing that you're beginning to feel overwhelmed is a great sign that, 49, you should check in to assess what's occupying your attentional space. Chances are you're trying to cram too much into it at once. The best way to avoid this overload is to be more selective with what you permit into your attentional space. On the drive home, shut off the radio, which will enable you to process the day and also remember your intention to pick up bread. At home, pause or mute the TV so you don't try to continue processing the show and forget that you're heading to fetch a note that's in the other room. Making small changes like these allows you to keep your attention on your intention. Simplifying our attentional space lets us maintain enough room to work and live intentionally throughout the day. This lets us spend more time on what's important and meaningful in the moment. The state of your attentional space determines the state of your life. When your attentional space is overwhelmed, you, in turn, feel overwhelmed. When your attentional space is clear, you also feel clear. The tidier you keep your attentional space, the more clearly you think. Time for a quick check-in: what's occupying your attentional space at this moment? Take stock of everything that's on your mind. If you find that your attentional space is a bit too full, simplify what's in it, either by writing down these things so you can deal with them later or by refocusing on the book in your hands. Simplifying what we focus on in the moment may feel counterintuitive. When we have so much to get done, our natural impulse is to focus on as much as possible. Compounding this is the fact that the brain's prefrontal cortex, the large part of the forebrain that lets us plan, think logically, and get work done, has a built-in novelty bias. Whenever we switch between tasks, it rewards us with dopamine, that amazing pleasure chemical that rushes through our brain whenever we devour a medium-sized pizza, accomplish something awesome, or have a drink or two after work. You may have noticed that you instinctively reach for your tablet when you sit down to watch TV, that you can't resist keeping your email open in another window as you work, or that you feel more stimulated when your phone is by your side. Continually seeking novel stimuli makes us feel more productive. After all, we're doing more in each moment. But again, just because we're busier doesn't mean we're getting more accomplished. Almost every book in the wellness space has an obligatory section discussing how the brain is primitive, and that we have to learn to rise above the impulses it gives rise to. This book is no exception. An unfortunate truth is that the brain is not built to do knowledge work. It's wired for survival and reproduction. We have evolved to crave things that provide us with a surge of dopamine, which reinforces habits and behaviors that have historically aided our chances at survival. Our brain provides a hit of dopamine after sex as a reward for procreating. It does so when we consume sugar, which is energy-dense and enables us to survive longer with less food, which was useful early in our evolution, when conditions weren't as bountiful as they are today. Our brains also reward us for poorly managing our attention, because for our early ancestors, seeking novel threats in the environment aided their chance of survival. Instead of focusing so deeply on stoking a fire that they were not alert to a prowling tiger, early humans were constantly scanning for potential dangers around them. If that, 50, made them a bit less efficient in attending to the fire, they survived to see another day, and start another fire. Today the only nearby tigers are at the zoo, and the novelty bias that once benefited us now works actively against us. The devices we own, our TV, tablet, computer, and smartphone included, are infinitely more stimulating than the other productive and meaningful things we could be focusing on, and so with fewer predators to worry about, we naturally focus on our electronics instead. After years of researching the topic, I've found that productivity has become a bit of a loaded term. What it usually connotes is a condition that feels cold, corporate, and overly focused on efficiency. I prefer a different, and friendlier, definition. Productivity means accomplishing what we intend to. If our plan today is to write 3,000 words, rock a presentation with our leadership team, and catch up on our email, and we successfully accomplish all of those, we were perfectly productive. Likewise, if we intend to have a relaxing day and manage to do absolutely nothing, we're again perfectly productive. Being busy doesn't make us productive. It doesn't matter how busy we are if that busyness doesn't lead us to accomplish anything of importance. Productivity is not about cramming more into our days but about doing the right thing in each moment. The costs add up. It bears repeating that there is nothing inherently wrong with multitasking. It's entirely possible to multitask, especially when it comes to the habitual tasks in our work and life. But it's important to make a distinction between shifting our attention and multitasking. Multitasking means concurrently trying to focus on more than one thing at a time. Shifting our attention is the movement of our attentional spotlight, or our attentional space, from one task to another. Shifting attention throughout the day is necessary. If we focused on just one thing all day long, no matter how important it was, we probably wouldn't have a job. Still, too much shifting can be dangerous, especially when we're surrounded by more novel objects and distractions than our brain is capable of handling. While slipping into autopilot mode is the largest cost of attention overflow, there are other disadvantages as well. For starters, letting your attentional space overflow affects your memory. You may have noticed that when you watch TV or a movie with your phone by your side, you recall much less of what you've seen. In fact, I've noticed that as I've allowed more devices into my life, I remember less in general. Technology speeds up time by tempting us in each moment to fill our attention to the brim. This leads us to remember less, because it is only when we pay attention to something that our brain actively encodes it into memory. When we make our attentional space juggle too many tasks, we fail to notice and remember the details of our most important work. When we multitask, we even process our work with an entirely different part of our brain. Take studying as an example. As Russell Poldrack, a psychology professor at Stanford, explained to me, when we learn while we multitask, we rely more heavily on the basal ganglia, a brain system that's 51, involved in the learning of skills and habits. However, when we encode information in a more focused state, we rely more heavily on our brain's hippocampus, which actually lets us store and recall the information. What use is our time if not to create memories of conversations, meals, vacations, and other experiences? When we fail to focus deeply on any one thing, we focus instead only on the highlights of what we're doing and, as a consequence, later forget how we spent our time. Letting our attention overflow makes our actions less meaningful, because we don't remember how we spent our time in the first place. This affects our productivity in the long run. We make more mistakes because we don't properly encode the lessons we learned the first time we messed up. We also accumulate less knowledge, which, when we do knowledge work for a living, sets us back in the long run. Constantly shifting our attentional spotlight to focus on one thing and then another not only prevents the formation of memories but also undermines our productivity. Research shows that the more often we fill our attention to the brim, the longer it takes us to switch between tasks, the less we're able to filter out irrelevant information on the fly, and the poorer we become at suppressing the urge to switch between tasks in the first place. As I mentioned back in Chapter 0, when we're working in front of a computer, a device that's obviously chock full of novel things to focus on average, we work for just 40 seconds before we're either interrupted or distracted, or in other words, interrupt ourselves. This number becomes even more concerning when you consider the fact that our phone is by our side and interrupting us as well. Needless to say, our best work happens beyond this 40-second mark. Nearly every single important task takes more than 40 seconds of focused attention to do well. 52. On top of the obvious productivity toll of continually interrupting ourselves, we're also not that good at shifting our attention. Even when our attentional space is relatively clear and focused on just one task, there are deep costs associated with switching quickly to another. According to Sophie Leroy, a professor of organizational behavior at the University of Washington, it's not possible for us to seamlessly switch attention from one task to another. Leroy coined the term attention residue to describe the fragments of the previous task that remain in our attentional space after we shift to another activity. It could be that I've devoted an entire chapter later in the book to dealing with these distractions and interruptions, but here's a quick tip. One of the best things you can do for your productivity is launch the Settings app on your phone and scroll through the notification settings for each app. Shut off all the ones that aren't absolutely necessary. Do the same on your computer and tablet if you frequently find your focus derailed as you use these devices. Which interruptions are truly important, and which are preventing you from getting past this 40-second mark? Most of them aren't worth it. This is why I've deleted email on my phone entirely. Sitting in a meeting and your mind keeps going to a project you were working on right before the meeting, or something you anticipate doing right after the meeting. It's having that divided attention, where part of your brain is thinking about those other ongoing projects that you have. This is what makes it so difficult to devote yourself to what you're supposed to be doing in the present. This attention residue keeps our mind continuing to evaluate, problem solve, reflect, and ruminate about a previous task long after we've transitioned to the next. 53. Switching becomes easier only once we finish a task, especially when time pressure, like a deadline, motivates us to get the task done. By contrast, Leroy explains, if you work on something and you don't really have to rush, but you get it done, your brain can keep thinking about what else should I have done, or is there another way to do this task, or maybe I could have done better. Even though the task is completed, it's hard for your brain to get closure in general. Since our brain is no longer motivated to complete these loose deadline tasks, Leroy found that the mental activation of the goal diminishes. Time pressure narrows our focus on the task, restricting us from considering a number of more creative ways to complete it. We don't question our approach as much, because we haven't stepped back to consider the alternatives. This makes it easier to switch. All this raises a question: just how severe is the productivity cost of switching? Switching does make your work more stimulating, and its costs may be worth bearing if your work takes only 5% longer and you make only the occasional mistake. In practice, though, the cost is usually much greater. One study found that when we, 54, continually switch between tasks, our work takes 50% longer, compared with doing one task from start to completion. If you're working on a pressure or deadline-free project, consider taking a break before starting something else so more of that attentional residue can dissipate. As far as your productivity is concerned, the best time to take a break is after you've finished a big task. The quality of your intention is the bouncer of your attentional space. It lets in the productive objects of attention and keeps the distractions out. Few things will benefit your overall quality of life more than focusing with intention. It isn't possible to work and live with intention 100% of the time. Demands get in the way, our focus shifts, and our attentional space overflows, but we can maintain our intention for enough of the day to accomplish a lot more than we would otherwise. This chapter has been largely theoretical. In order to put its advice into practice, you'll need to do several things: set intentions more often, modify your environment to be less distracting, overcome the mental resistance you have to certain tasks, eliminate distractions before they derail you, and clear the distractions inside your own head. The subsequent chapters cover each of these ideas in turn, but understanding the principles behind them is essential. Choosing where your attention is focused and maintaining a clear attentional space accomplishes several things at once. You will accomplish what you intend to much more often, focus more deeply, because you become a better defender of your attentional space, remember more, because you're able to more deeply process what you're doing, experience less guilt and doubt, knowing you've worked with intention, waste less time working on unimportant things, fall victim to fewer distractions both external and internal, experience greater mental clarity, reduce stress and fewer feelings of being overwhelmed, feel a stronger purpose behind your work, because you've chosen what's worthy of your attention. Working with intention also prevents you from experiencing feelings of dullness, which stem from having a lack of purpose, and develop deeper relationships and friendships as you spend more attention, not just time, with people. There are numerous ways to measure the quality of your attention, but I've developed 3 measures to track my own progress. You can use these yardsticks to measure your progress as you adopt the tactics in this book into your life. 1. How much of your time you spend intentionally. 2. How long you can hold your focus in one sitting. 3. How long your mind wanders before you catch it. 55. Now it's time to get tactical. 56, 57, 58, Chapter 3 The Power of Hyperfocus. Introducing Hyperfocus. Think back to your last uber productive work day, one when you accomplished a huge amount. On that day, chances are a number of things were true. For starters, you were probably focusing on only one thing, maybe out of necessity, driven by a deadline. This one task filled your attentional space. You were also likely able to dodge distractions and quickly got back on track every time an interruption did come up. While you were working with intense focus, you weren't working frantically, constantly switching between tasks. When your attention wandered, which it still did often, but less than usual, you quickly brought it back to the task at hand. Your work was probably also at a comfortable level of difficulty, not so hard as to be intimidating, not so easy that it could be done out of habit. Because of this, you may have even become completely engrossed in your work, entering a flow state, where each time you looked at the clock another hour had flown by, even though you experienced that time as only 15 minutes. Miraculously, you managed to accomplish the equivalent of several hours of work in each of them. Finally, once you overcame the hurdle of getting started, you experienced little resistance to continuing. Even though you were working hard, you weren't exhausted afterward. Curiously, you were less tired than after slower workdays. Your motivation remained strong even if you had to stop working because you got hungry or had a meeting or it was time to head home. On this day you activated your brain's most productive mode, hyperfocus*. When you hyperfocus on a task, you expand one task, project, or other object of attention, 59, 60, so it fills your attentional space completely. You enter this mode by managing your attention deliberately and purposefully, by choosing one important object of attention, eliminating distractions that will inevitably arise as you work, and then focusing on just that one task. Hyperfocus is many things at 61. Once, it's deliberate, undistracted, and quick to refocus, and it leads us to become completely immersed in our work. It also makes us immensely happy. Recall how energized you were by your work the last time you found yourself in this state. In hyperfocus you might even feel more relaxed than you usually are when you work. Allowing one task or project to consume your full attentional space means the state doesn't make you feel stressed or overwhelmed. Your attentional space doesn't overflow, and your work doesn't feel nearly as chaotic. Since hyperfocus is so much more productive, you can slow down a bit and still accomplish an incredible amount in a short period of time. This mode may feel like an elusive luxury in the on-the-go environments in which we work and live today. But nothing could be further from the truth. Hyperfocus means you're less busy, because you're permitting fewer objects into your attentional space. Picking which tasks to work on ahead of time lets you focus on what's actually important in the moment. This has never been more crucial than in our knowledge work environments, where not all tasks are created equal. You'll often accomplish more in 1 hour of hyperfocus than in an entire day spent filling your attentional space to the brim with multiple and often undeliberate concerns. This is counterintuitive but absolutely essential advice. The more demands made on your time, the more essential it becomes to choose what and how many things you pay attention to. You're never too busy to hyperfocus. 62. When it comes to your most important tasks, the fewer things you pay attention to, the more productive you become. Hyperfocusing on habits. The most important aspect of hyperfocus is that only one productive or meaningful task consumes your attentional space. This is simply non-negotiable. Here's why. The most critical tasks, projects, and commitments benefit from every bit of extra attention. They're usually not habits, which by default don't often consume your full attentional space. This is not to say it's impossible to hyperfocus on a habit. There is no task too small to consume your attention. If you tried hard enough, you could commit your complete attention to watching paint dry. But there are 2 reasons why this mental mode is best preserved for complex tasks, rather than habits. First, hyperfocus requires willpower and mental energy to activate, drawing from the limited supply we have to make it through the day. Because habits consume so little of our attentional space, there's really no need to hyperfocus on them. 63. Second, and more interesting, while your performance on complex tasks benefits when you focus more completely, your habitual task performance actually suffers when you focus with your total attention. You may have experienced this the last time you noticed someone watching you walk, and you brought your focus to making sure you walked like a perfectly normal human being. Chances are you immediately started moving like a full-blown mechanical robot, feeling as if you were flailing all over the sidewalk. To put it bluntly, your walking performance suffered. Or maybe the last time you went bowling you found yourself thinking about why you were scoring more points than usual, what exactly you were doing well. But then your opponents started pulling ahead and eventually won. You choked, and your performance suffered by your bringing your full attention to a game you usually play out of habit. Studies analyzing skilled typists found this same phenomenon. The more attention they brought to their typing, the slower they typed and the more mistakes they made. When doing such habitual tasks, it's best to not focus completely on what you're doing. Save hyperfocus for your most complex tasks, things that will actually benefit from your complete attention, such as writing a report, mapping your team's budget, or having a meaningful conversation with a loved one. A few marvelous things happen when you do so. First, because you're focusing on a single task, you likely have some attentional space to spare, enough that you are also able to keep your original intention in mind. As a result, you are less likely to be derailed by distractions and interruptions, because you have enough awareness to notice that they are about to derail you. And maybe most important, you have enough attention to also think deeply about the task as you work. This allows you to remember and learn more, get back on track when your mind wanders, and consider alternative approaches as you solve problems. All of this will save you an immense amount of time in completing the task. One of the best ways to get more done and done faster is by preventing yourself from focusing on things that aren't important. The 4 stages of hyperfocus: in any given moment you're focused on either your external environment, the thoughts in your head, or both. Engaging solely with your external environment means you're effectively living on autopilot. You slip into this mode as you wait for the traffic light to change or find yourself bouncing around a loop of the same apps on your phone. When you're engaged only with the thoughts in your head, you're daydreaming. This can happen when you go on a quick walk without your phone, your mind wanders in the shower, or you go for a jog. You enter into hyperfocus when you engage both your thoughts and your external environment and direct them at one thing intentionally. So how do we enter hyperfocus mode? The science suggests we pass through 4 states as we begin to focus. First, we're focused and productive. Then, assuming we don't get distracted or interrupted, our 64 mind begins to wander. Third, we make note of this mind wandering. This can take a while, especially if we don't frequently check what is consuming our attentional space. On average, we notice about 5 times an hour that our mind has wandered. And fourth, we shift our focus back to our original object of attention. The 4 stages of hyperfocus are modeled on this framework. To hyperfocus, you must 1. Choose a productive or meaningful object of attention. 2. Eliminate as many external and internal distractions as you can. 3. Focus on that chosen object of attention. And 4. Continually draw your focus back to that one object of attention. Setting an intention for what we plan to focus on is the most important step. The more productive and meaningful the task, the more productive and meaningful your actions become. For example, if you set your intention to focus on mentoring a new employee, automating a repetitive task, or brainstorming a new product idea, you'll be infinitely more productive than if you work intention-free and in autopilot mode. This same idea applies at home. The more meaningful our objects of focus, the more meaningful our life becomes. We experience the benefits of hyperfocus mode by setting such simple intentions as being present in a conversation with our partner or fully enjoying a meal with our family. We learn more, remember more, and process our actions more deeply, and our lives become more meaningful as a result. This first step to reaching hyperfocus mode is essential. Intention absolutely has to precede attention. The second step to reaching hyperfocus is eliminating as many internal and external distractions as possible. There's a simple reason we fall victim to distraction. In the moment, distractions are more attractive objects of attention than what we really ought to be doing. This is true both at work and at home. Email alerts that pop into the corner of our screen are usually more tempting than the task we're doing in another window. The TV behind our partner at the pub is usually more enticing than focusing on the conversation. Distractions are infinitely easier to deal with in advance. By the time they appear, it's often already too late to defend our intention against them. Internal distractions must be tamed as well, including random, and sometimes cringe-worthy, memories and thoughts that bubble up as we're trying to focus, the mental resistance we have to unappealing tasks, like doing taxes or cleaning the garage, and the times we want to focus but our mind wants to wander. Third, hyperfocus becomes possible when we focus on our chosen object of attention for a predetermined amount of time. This involves hunkering down for a set period that is both comfortable and feasible. The more groundwork we lay in the first 2 steps of hyperfocus, the more deeply and confidently we can accomplish step 3. Fourth, and finally, hyperfocus is about drawing our attention back to the original object of attention when our mind wanders. I'll repeat this point frequently, as it's one of the most important ideas in this book. Again, research shows that our mind wanders for 47% of the day. In other words, if we're awake for 18 hours, we're engaged in what we're doing for just 8 of them. It's normal for our mind to wander, but the key is to center it so we can spend time and attention on what's actually in front of us. 65. In addition, it takes an average of 22 minutes to resume working on a task after we're distracted or interrupted. We fare even worse when we interrupt or distract ourselves. In these cases, it takes 29 minutes to return to working on the original task. The more often we assess what's occupying our attentional space, the quicker we're able to get back on track. Don't stress too much about this right now, we'll get to specifics later in the book. The concept of hyperfocus can be summed up in a single tranquil sentence: keep one important, complex object of attention in your awareness as you work. Choosing what to focus on attention without intention is wasted energy. Intention should always precede attention. In fact, the 2 ideas pair perfectly. Intention setting allows us to decide how we should spend our time, Focusing our attention on that task gets it done efficiently. The best way to become more productive is to choose what you want to accomplish before you begin working. When we set intentions, it's important to remember that not all work tasks are created equal. Some tasks enable us to accomplish an incredible amount with every minute we spend on them. These include such goals as setting aside time to plan what main tasks you want to accomplish each day, mentoring a new employee who joined your team a month ago, and writing that book you've been meaning to for years. These tasks fall into the necessary and purposeful quadrants discussed in Chapter 1. When you measure work in these quadrants against unnecessary and distracting tasks like attending useless meetings, catching up on your social media feeds, and repeatedly checking for new email, it's not hard to see which are more productive. When we don't choose which quadrants of tasks to spend time on, we fall into autopilot. This is not to say that we can't get by in autopilot mode. By being ultra-responsive to the work that comes our way, we can stay on top of most of it and probably be productive enough to not lose our jobs. But autopilot also fails to progress our work in any meaningful way. I suspect you don't get paid simply to play the role of traffic cop by moving emails, conversations, and instant messages around. Such tasks, and answering unanticipated demands that come your way, are always necessary. But whenever possible, you should take an active role in choosing where you spend your time and attention. If you haven't done so already, this is a great time to create a 2x2 grid of your work, sorting your standard monthly tasks based on whether they're productive or unproductive and attractive or unattractive. The ironic thing about investing in your productivity is that it's almost impossible to do when you're slogging it out in the office trenches. There's simply too much to keep up with, meetings, email chains, and project deadlines included. For this reason, the best productivity tactics are the ones that require you to step back and remove yourself from your work so you have the mental space to think critically about how you should approach that work differently. That way, when you return to work, you can do it more intelligently, instead of just harder. Figuring out your 4 types of work tasks is one of these stepping back activities. Now is the best time to do so, especially before you read the very next section. It'll take just 5 to 10 minutes. 66. In researching attention and intention over the last few years, I've developed a few favorite daily intention setting rituals. Here are my top 3. 1. The rule of 3. You can probably skim this section if you're familiar with material I've written in the past. If not, allow me to introduce the rule of 3. At the start of each day, choose the 3 things you want to have accomplished by day's end. While a to-do list is useful to capture the minutiae of the day, these 3 intention slots should be reserved for your most important daily tasks. I've done this little ritual every morning for several years, ever since learning about it from Microsoft's Director of Digital Transformation, J.D. Meyer. The rule of 3 is deceptively simple. By forcing yourself to pick just 3 main intentions at the start of each day, you accomplish several things. You choose what's important but also what's not important. The constraints of this rule push you to figure out what actually matters. The rule is also flexible within the constraints of your day. If your calendar is packed with meetings, those commitments may dictate the scope of your 3 intentions, while an appointment-free day means you can set intentions to accomplish more important and less urgent tasks. When unexpected tasks and projects come your way, you can weigh those new responsibilities against the intentions you've already set. Because 3 ideas fit comfortably within your attentional space, you can recall and remember your original intentions with relative ease. Make sure to keep your 3 intentions where you can see them. I keep mine on end days when your schedule is set, such as when the giant whiteboard in my office, or, if I'm traveling, at the top of my daily to-do list. You're attending a conference you may not be able to, which is synced between devices in determine how you spend your time and attention. One note. If you're like me, you may also can, however, change how you relate to what you have. Find it handy to set 3 weekly intentions, to get done. For example, instead of making an as well as 3 daily personal intention to attend conference talks, Opt instead to intentions such as disconnecting from connect with 5 new people at the cocktail reception, work during dinner, visiting the gym before heading home from the office, or gathering receipts for taxes. To your most consequential tasks, a second intention setting ritual I follow is considering which items on my to-do list are the most consequential. If you have the habit of maintaining a to-do list, which I highly recommend and whose power I will discuss later in the book, take a second to consider the consequences of carrying out each task, the sum of both its short-term and long-term consequences. The most important tasks on your list are the ones that lead to the greatest positive consequences. 67. What will be different in the world or in your work or in your life as a result of your spending time doing each of the items on your list? What task is the equivalent of a domino in a line of 100 that, once it topples over, initiates a chain reaction that lets you accomplish a great deal? Another way to look at this, when deciding what to do, instead of considering just the immediate consequences of an activity, also consider the second and third order consequences. For example, let's say you're deciding whether to order a funnel cake for dessert. The immediate consequence of the decision is that you enjoy eating the cake. But the second and third order consequences are quite a bit steeper. A second order consequence might be that you'll feel terrible for the rest of the evening. Third order consequences might include gaining weight or breaking a new diet regimen. This is a powerful idea to internalize, especially since the most important tasks are often not the ones that immediately feel the most urgent or productive. Writing a guide for new hires may not, in the moment, feel as valuable as answering a dozen emails, but if that guide cuts down on the time it takes to bring each new employee on board, makes her feel more welcome, and also serves to make her more productive, it is easily the most consequential thing on your list. Other consequential tasks might include automating a task that's annoying and repetitive, disconnecting so you can focus on designing the workflow for an app you're building, or forming an office mentorship program that lets employees easily share their knowledge. If you have a lot of tasks on your to-do list, ask yourself, which are the most consequential? This exercise works well in tandem with the 4 types of tasks in your work. Once you've separated them into the 4 quadrants of necessary, purposeful, distracting, and unnecessary, ask yourself, out of the necessary and purposeful tasks, which have the potential to set off a chain reaction? 3. The hourly awareness chime. Setting 3 daily intentions and prioritizing your most consequential tasks are great ways to be more intentional every day and week. But how can you ensure you're working intentionally on a moment-by-moment basis? As far as productivity is concerned, these individual moments are where the rubber meets the road. It's pointless to set goals and intentions if you don't act toward accomplishing them throughout the day. My favorite way to make sure I'm staying on track with my intentions is to frequently check what's occupying my attentional space to reflect on whether I'm focusing on what's important and consequential or whether I've slipped into autopilot mode. To do so, I set an hourly awareness chime. A key theme of Hyperfocus is that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself when you do notice your brain drifting off or doing something else weird. Your mind will always wander, so consider how that might present an opportunity to assess how you're feeling and then to set a path for what to do next. Research shows that we are more likely to catch our minds wandering when we reward ourselves for doing so. Even if you minimize 1 or 2 distractions and set just 1 or 2 intentions each day, you're doing better than most. If you're anything like me, your hourly awareness chime may at 68 first reveal that you're usually not working on something important or consequential. That's okay and even to be expected. The important thing is that you're regularly checking what's occupying your attentional space. Set an hourly timer on your phone, smartwatch, or another device. This will easily be the most productive interruption you receive throughout the day. When your hourly chime rings, ask yourself the following: was your mind wandering when the awareness chime sounded? Are you working on autopilot or on something you intentionally chose to do? It's so satisfying to see this improve over time. Are you immersed in a productive task? If so, how long have you spent focusing on it? If it was an impressive amount of time, don't let the awareness chime trip you up. Keep going. What's the most consequential thing you could be doing right now? Are you working on it? How full is your attentional space? Is it overflowing, or do you have attention to spare? Are there distractions preventing you from hyperfocusing on your work? You don't have to answer all of these questions. Pick 2 or 3 prompts that you find most helpful, ones that will make you refocus on what's important. Doing this hourly increases all 3 measures of attention quality. It helps you focus longer because you spot and prevent distractions on the horizon. You notice more often that your mind has wandered and can refocus it, and you can, over time, spend more of your day working intentionally. When you first start this check-in, you probably won't fare so well and will find yourself frequently working on autopilot, getting distracted, and spending time on unnecessary and distracting tasks. That's fine. When you do, adjust course to work on a task that's more productive, and tame whatever distractions derailed you in that moment. If you notice the same distractions frequently popping up, make a plan to deal with them. We'll do this in the next chapter. Try setting an hourly awareness chime for one workday this week. While at first the interruptions will admittedly be annoying, they'll establish a valuable new habit. If you don't like the idea of an awareness chime, try using a few cues in your environment that trigger you to think about what's occupying your attentional space. I no longer use an hourly awareness chime, though I found it to be the most helpful method to get into the practice. Today I reflect on what I've been working on during a few predetermined times, each time I walk to the washroom, when I leave my desk to get water or tea, or when my phone rings. I answer the call after a few rings, once I've reflected on what was occupying my attentional space. How to set stronger intentions. Over the last few decades, Peter Gallwitzer has been one of the most renowned contributors to the field of intention. He's perhaps best known for his groundbreaking research on the importance of not only setting intentions but also making them very, 69, specific. While we often achieve our vague intentions, specific intentions greatly increase our odds of overall success. Let's say, for example, you rushed to set your personal intentions this morning and came up with this list: 1. Go to the gym. 2. Quit working when I get home. 3. Get to bed by a reasonable time. I've deliberately made these intentions vague, but how can we make them more specific and likely to stick? First, it's worth considering how effective these intentions are as I've formulated them. They will certainly prove to be more effective than doing nothing. In fact, Gallwitzer's research discovered that even vague intentions like these boost your odds of successfully carrying them out by around 20% to 30%. So, if you're lucky, you might cross another 1 or 2 off the list. Not bad. Setting more specific intentions, however, does something remarkable: it makes our odds of success much higher. In one study, Gallwitzer and his research colleague Veronica Brandstatter asked participants to set an intention to complete a difficult goal over Christmas break, such as completing a term paper, finding a new apartment, or settling a conflict with their significant other. Some students set a vague intention while others set what Gallwitzer calls an implementation intention. As he explains the term, make a very detailed plan on how you want to achieve what you want to achieve. What I'm arguing in my research is that goals need plans, ideally plans that include when, where, and which kind of action to move towards the goal. In other words, if a student's vague goal was to find an apartment during Christmas break, his implementation intention could be: I will hunt for apartments on Craigslist and email 3 apartment landlords in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Comparing Gallwitzer and Brandstatter's 2 participant groups is where things get interesting. A remarkable 62% of students who set a specific implementation intention followed through on their goals. The group that did not set an implementation intention fared a lot more poorly, following through on their original intention a third as often, a paltry 22% of the time. This effect, which subsequent studies validated further, was positively staggering. Setting specific intentions can double or triple your odds of success. With that in mind, let's quickly turn my 3 vague intentions into implementation intentions. 1. Go to the gym becomes schedule and go to the gym on my lunch break. 2. Quit working when I get home is reframed as put my work phone on airplane mode and my work laptop in another room, and stay disconnected for the evening. 3. Get to bed by a reasonable time becomes set a bedtime alarm for 10 p.m., and when it goes off, start winding down. Implementation intentions are powerful in much the same way as habits. When you begin a habit, your brain carries out the rest of the sequence largely on autopilot. Once you have a game plan for an implementation intention, when you encounter the environmental cue to initiate it, your lunch break rolls around, you get home after a 70 stressful day at work, or your bedtime alarm goes off, you subconsciously get the ball rolling to accomplish your goals. Your intentions take almost no effort to initiate. As Gallwitzer and Brandstatter put it, action initiation becomes swift, efficient, and does not require conscious intent. In other words, we begin to act toward our original goal automatically. Gallwitzer told me that the intentions do not necessarily have to be precise if they are specific enough for a person to understand and identify the situational cues. We did studies with tennis players, and they made plans on how they want to respond with the problems that might come up in the game. Some of the tennis players were specifying when I get irritated or when I get nervous. That is not very specific or concrete, but it worked brilliantly because they knew what they meant with nervous. Specific means the person can identify the critical situation. There are two notable caveats to setting specific intentions. First, you have to actually care about your intentions. Implementation intentions don't work nearly as well for goals that don't especially matter to you or that you've long abandoned. If you had a goal in the 1990s to amass the world's largest collection of Furbies, you'll probably be a lot less motivated to achieve that goal today. Second, easy to accomplish intentions don't have to be as specific. Deciding in advance when you'll work on a task is significantly more important for a difficult one than when your intention is to do something simple. If it's the weekend, and your intention is to go to the gym at least once, you don't need to be as definite about when you'll do so. If you're trying to accomplish something more challenging, though, like saying no to dessert at the restaurant on Saturday, setting a more specific intention is essential. That vague intention can become more specific by planning, when you see the dessert menu, to politely decline and treat yourself to a decaf coffee instead. This caveat works well for intentions at home, but when Monday rolls around, you may need to again set more thoughtful intentions. When the goals are tough, or when you have so many goals and it's hard to attain them all, that's when planning works particularly well, Gallwitzer adds. Starting a hyperfocus ritual. The next chapter focuses on taming the external and internal distractions that inevitably derail hyperfocus. However, before discussing these, I want to offer a few simple strategies to begin hyperfocusing on your intentions. These will become infinitely more powerful as you learn to tame the distractions in your work in advance. Let's first cover how to focus, and then when. Both ideas are pretty simple. How to hyperfocus. Start by feeling out how long you want to hyperfocus. Have a dialogue with yourself about how resistant you feel toward the mode, particularly if you're about to hunker down on a difficult, frustrating, or unstructured task. As an example, do I feel comfortable focusing for an hour? No way. 45 minutes? Better, but still no. 30 minutes? That's doable, but still. Okay, 25 minutes? Actually, I could probably do that. It's incredibly, 71, rewarding to experience your hyperfocus time limit increase over time. Push yourself but not too hard. When I started practicing hyperfocus, I began with 15-minute blocks of time, each punctuated by a 5 to 10-minute distraction break. Hyperfocusing all day would be a chore, and a few stimulating distractions are always fun, especially at first. You'll soon become accustomed to working with fewer distractions. Anticipate obstacles ahead of time. If I know I have a busy few days coming up, at the beginning of the week I like to schedule my hyperfocus period several chunks of time throughout the week that I'll use to focus on something important. This way, I make sure to carve out time to hyperfocus, instead of getting swept up in last-minute tasks and putting out proverbial fires. Such planning lets my co-workers and assistant know not to book me during these times, and it also reminds me when I'm committed to focus. In weeks like these, a few minutes of advanced planning can save hours of wasted productivity. Set a timer. I usually use my phone for this, which might sound ironic, given the distractions it can bring. If these phone distractions will cause a focus black hole, either put it on airplane mode or use a watch or other timer. Hyperfocus. When you notice that your mind has wandered or that you've gotten distracted, bring your attention back to your intention. Again, don't be too tough on yourself when this happens. This is the way your brain is wired to work. If you feel like going for longer when your timer rings, which you probably will because you'll be on a roll, don't stop. That covers the how. Here are a few suggestions that I have found work for deciding when you should hyperfocus, whenever you can. Naturally, we need time for the little things, but the more you can hyperfocus, the better. Throughout the week, you should schedule as many blocks of time to hyperfocus as your work will allow, and for as long as you personally feel comfortable. We're the most productive and happy when we work on one meaningful thing at a time, so there's no reason not to spend as much time in this mode as we possibly can. Whenever you have an important task or project and a window in which you can work on it, don't pass up the opportunity to hyperfocus. You'll be missing out on a lot of productivity if you do. Naturally, because of the nature of our jobs, we often have to do a lot of collaborative work, which necessitates our being available to our colleagues. But when you're working on a task that only you can do, it's the perfect time to enter into hyperfocus mode. Around the constraints of your work. Most of us don't have the luxury of hyperfocusing whenever we wish. Productivity is often a process of understanding our constraints. On most days we will be able to find a few opportunities to hyperfocus, and on others it simply won't be possible. I find the latter to be especially the case while traveling, when I'm at a conference, or when I have a day full of exhausting meetings. Make sure you account for 72 time and energy constraints, and if possible, work around these obstacles when you're planning your week. When you need to work on a complex task. While I started hyperfocusing by scheduling blocks of time into my calendar, I now enter into the mode whenever I'm working on a complex task or project that will benefit from my full attention. If I'm just checking my email, I won't set an intention to hyperfocus, but if I'm writing, planning a talk, or attending an important meeting, I invariably do. Based on how averse you are to what you intend to accomplish. The more aversive you find a task or project, the more important it is to tame distractions ahead of time. You're most likely to procrastinate on tasks that you consider boring, frustrating, difficult, ambiguous, or unstructured, or that you don't find rewarding or meaningful. In fact, if you call to mind something you're putting off doing, chances are it has most of these characteristics. The more aversive a task, the more important it is that we enter into a hyperfocused state so we can work on the task with intention. Building your focus. Over the next several chapters, I'll give you the tools you need to develop your focus. As you'll find, your ability to hyperfocus depends on a few factors, all of which affect the quality of your attention, how frequently you seek out new and novel objects of attention. This is often why we initially resist a hyperfocus ritual. How often you habitually overload your attentional space. How frequently your attention is derailed by interruptions and distractions. How many tasks, commitments, ideas, and other unresolved issues you're keeping in your head. How frequently you practice meta-awareness, checking what's already consuming your attention. As we'll discuss, even your mood and diet can influence hyperfocus. For these reasons and more, everyone has a different starting point when it comes to entering the mode. Ironically, when I first started exploring the research on how we best manage our attention, I could hardly focus for more than a few minutes before becoming distracted. This is often the case when we continually seek novel objects of attention and work in a distracting environment. While experimenting with the research, I've been able to steadily increase the amount of time I can hyperfocus, and I've grown accustomed to working with fewer distractions. I wrote the sentence you're now reading near the end of a 45-minute hyperfocus session, my third of the day. These sessions have enabled me to write exactly 2,286 words in around 2 hours. This is one of the fun parts about writing a book about productivity. You can verify that your methods actually work by using them to write the book itself. The third session was my last hyperfocus block, and between 73, those periods I caught up on email, enjoyed checking social media, and had a quick chat with a coworker or two. But right now isn't one of those times. And focusing on just one thing, writing these words, is what has allowed me to be so productive over the last 45 minutes. It'll work for you too. 74, 75, 76, Chapter 4, Taming Distractions. 40 seconds. Two fascinating experts I had the chance to speak with while writing this book were Gloria Mark and Mary Zerwinski. Mark is a professor of information science at the University of California at Irvine and is perhaps the world's foremost expert on attention and multitasking. She has conducted attentional studies in partnership with NASA and with companies like Boeing, Intel, IBM, and Microsoft. Zerwinski, a principal researcher at Microsoft, is one of the leading experts on how people and computers interact. Her work, and my conversations with her, color most of this chapter. The two scientists have teamed up to conduct scores of studies into our relationship with technology on a daily basis. What I love the most about their work is that they specialize in what is called in situ research, conducting studies in actual workplaces on real workers. To measure how stressed participants felt after multitasking or doing email, Mark and Zerwinski strapped monitors to them to wear 24 hours a day to chart their heart rate variability, a scientifically validated measure of stress. With their permission, Mark and Zerwinski installed a logging program on participants' computers to observe exactly how often they switched between tasks every 40 seconds. Shockingly, we interrupt ourselves even more often when we keep apps like IM and Skype open every 35 seconds. Their work is worth calling out for a number of reasons. First, in situ research is much more difficult to conduct. It took Mark 6 years to find an organization that would let her study employees when they went without email for a week, for example, but the approach is particularly worthwhile. As she explained to me, as opposed to taking someone into a laboratory and setting up artificial conditions to simulate the world, you're going into the world, and observing things as they actually are. Second, their research is worth examining because it's groundbreaking. By far my favorite of the studies they conducted was the 40-second task switching finding I cited above. So often we go from being totally productive and immersed in our work to interrupting ourselves to do something unrelated and far less important. We interrupt a meaningful conversation with a friend to check our phone, we set aside writing a report to initiate a pointless IM chat, we stop building an Excel worksheet to visit with an office colleague for no good reason. Another study they conducted found that we switch between computer applications 566 times during the average workday. This figure includes distractions that have nothing to do with our work itself. We check Facebook, for example, an average of 21 times a day. This average includes every subject in the study, some of whom didn't, 77, look at Facebook at all. When you calculate the average among people who visited Facebook at least once, it almost doubles, to 38 daily checks. Our work obviously suffers from these distractions, and we fail to enter into a hyper-focused state. We compensate by working faster and more frantically, which affects the quality of what we produce and stresses us out. And perhaps most important, we fail to take control of, and deliberately manage, our attention. Interruptions that are in some way related to a project we're working on don't derail our productivity as severely if someone sends us a message with information relevant to a report we're preparing, for example, we can refocus with relative ease. But we rarely have just one project on our plate. On average, we're juggling about 10 simultaneously. Your email and message notifications may be worth keeping on if you and your team are collaborating on the same project in crunch mode, but under most circumstances this isn't the case. The costs of an unrelated interruption can be massive. It takes an average of 25 minutes to resume working on an activity after we're interrupted, and before resuming that activity, we work on an average of 2.26 other tasks. We don't simply attend to the distraction or interruption and then return to the original task. We become distracted a second time before doing so. Once you become aware of how frequently you interrupt yourself, it's hard to go back to working the same way again. This is why it is critical to manage your attentional space wisely. You can focus for so much longer by taming distractions ahead of time. Why we love distractions. There is a simple reason why we fall victim to distractions. Even though we know they're unproductive, in the moment they are much more enticing than our work. When our brain is even slightly resisting a task, it hunts for more attractive things it could do instead. Let your mind be for a few seconds, and you'll find that it gravitates to more captivating, and usually less important, objects of attention than what you should be focusing on. We can't even go to the bathroom anymore without mindlessly distracting ourselves. I'd genuinely love to see how the duration of our bathroom breaks has changed over time. I'd wager a guess that they've at least doubled now that we carry around smartphones. Our drive toward distractions is made worse by our brain's built-in novelty bias and the fact that the websites and apps we frequent offer a hit of mindless stimulation and validation each time we visit them. You probably have a few notifications waiting each time you open Twitter: who shared your last post, new people who have followed you, and so on. It's hard to resist the urge to check the site throughout the day, knowing another small hit of validation is just a click away. Even if you have no messages waiting, the possibility that you could have some draws you back. I deleted my Facebook account a few years ago for this very reason. 78. I'm typing these words in one window on my computer screen, but I know that, in no time at all, it's possible to open another that could provide hours of distraction. Writing is a difficult task that my brain resists. I love the result, but the process takes a lot more focus and energy than checking social media, answering email, or checking the news. If I don't disable computer distractions ahead of time, I might as well wave goodbye to my productivity. As a small experiment, I didn't block any distractions on my computer this morning. Left to my own devices, I bounced around an endless loop of stimulating websites for 30 minutes. Looking at my browsing history, I had visited Twitter, Reddit, specifically the mechanical keyboard subreddit, several news websites, including Feedly, the New York Times, CNN, The Verge, and Macrumors, my second Twitter account, email. I have 3 email accounts and check them each a time or two, and the Amazon page for my first book, to check how well it was selling and to see if it had any new customer reviews. It's also worth noting that I check these websites after meditating for 25 minutes, a ritual that usually enables me to act with more intention. Chances are you have your own list of distracting websites and apps you frequent when you're resisting a task. The above anecdote alone should dispel any notion that, as a productivity expert, I have a superhuman level of self-control. What I am better at is managing my impulses ahead of time. After choosing how long you'll focus, eliminating distractions is the second step of hyperfocus. Eliminating distractions before you hunker down on a task makes focusing infinitely easier, as important tasks fill your attentional space quite naturally when there is nothing competing with them. Given that distractions have the potential to derail our productivity so frequently, and for so long, it's imperative that we deal with them ahead of time before we have to expend precious willpower to resist their allure. The 4 types of distractions. In Chapter 1 I introduced the 4 types of work tasks: productive tasks that are either necessary or purposeful, and unproductive tasks that are either unnecessary or distracting. In this section, we'll focus on the distracting tasks that are fun and unproductive. I define a distraction as anything that can direct us away from our intentions. In this respect, distractions and interruptions are much the same thing, because they both distance us from what we intend to accomplish. Some interruptions are essential, such as a piece of information you receive that's related to what you're working on in that moment. But most of them are worth taming ahead of time. 79. If we zoom in on the distracting work quadrant back in the first chapter, we can divide it up based on two criteria: whether or not we have control over the distractions and whether we find them annoying or fun. If you allocated your professional activities into the 4 types of work grid in Chapter 1, use the tasks in the distracting quadrant as a starting point to fill out the grid on the next page. There will be a number of items to add. Your distractions grid should contain every single thing, no matter how small, that draws you away from your intentions in the moment. It should also include distractions that aren't specifically work-related, such as the news and social media websites you visit as you work. I won't ask you to do many exercises as you read this book, but when I do include them, it's definitely for a good reason. I've uploaded printable versions of both charts to this book's website, hyperfocusbook.com. To illustrate what a filled-out grid looks like, here are the typical distractions that throw off my intentions throughout the course of a day. 80. Let's start with the top 2 quadrants: how to deal with distractions and interruptions that we can't control. There are 2 places from which distractions originate: ourselves and others, and both are important to deal with ahead of time. We can't prevent all distractions from arising. Even if we closed our office door with the intent to hyperfocus for a couple of hours, we'd still receive phone calls and the occasional knock at the door. Many distractions are preventable, but many aren't, at least not without incurring large social costs. Research shows, however, that we interrupt ourselves just as much as we are interrupted by other people. As Gloria Mark expressed it, simply looking at how we can break off external interruptions really only solves half the problem. Distractions from others aren't quite as damaging as the times we interrupt ourselves. It takes us an average of 29 minutes to resume a task after we have interrupted our own work. However, we get back on track around 6 minutes more quickly if we're interrupted by someone else. Whether it's 29 minutes or 23 minutes, we're still missing out on a lot of productivity. This is one of myriad reasons why periodically checking what's occupying our attentional space is so helpful. When we notice distractions have veered us off course, we waste less time on distracting tasks and get back on track more quickly. While we can't prevent interruptions from arising, we can control how we respond to them. The best way to deal with annoying tasks that we can't keep from hijacking our attentional space, office visitors, loud colleagues, and unnecessary meetings included, is to keep our original intention in mind and get back to working on it as soon as possible. 81. We should also be more deliberate about how we respond to the fun distractions we can't control. Of all the advice I offer in this book, this is the tactic I've struggled with the most. I'm often so gung-ho in accomplishing my intentions that I become rigid and grumpy when I'm interrupted, regardless of how enjoyable the interruption might be. As I've found, though, the best possible way to respond to pleasurable, controllable distractions like team lunches and calls from loved ones when I'm in the middle of something is to make a concerted effort to embrace and actually allow myself to enjoy them, but still get back on track when I'm able. Fretting over things you simply can't control is a waste of time, energy, and attention. I've gradually learned to use these interruptions as a cue to lighten up a bit and embrace whatever fun derailed my productivity, while periodically recalling my original intention so I can get back on track when I have the opportunity. Distraction-free mode. Most distractions fall into the category of ones we actually can control, which should therefore be tamed in advance. Over time, I've developed 2 modes of working: 1, a distraction-free mode, which I enter whenever I'm about to hyperfocus. 2, a regular, reduced distraction working mode, where I work with a manageable number of distractions throughout the day. Over the course of the day, we alternate between doing 2 types of work: focus work and collaborative work. Focus work benefits from all the attention we can bring to it. The less we're distracted, the more deeply we're able to focus, and the more, 82, productive we become. This allows us, as author Cal Newport has put it, to do deep work. Collaborative work, on the other hand, the breakdown of how much focus and collaborative work you do varies depending on your job. If you're an administrative assistant, your work may involve 90% collaboration and 10% focus work. If you're a writer, your work may require 90% focus work and 10% collaboration. Ask yourself, roughly what breakdown does your job have overall? Involves interacting with other people and being available in case you are needed. The more you and your team are available for one another, the more productive your team as a whole becomes. When engaged in collaborative work, it's best to enter into reduced distraction mode, in which you've tamed your largest distractions but are still accessible when you're needed. Let's tackle the more intense, distraction-free mode first. Creating a distraction-free mode enables you to eliminate almost every controllable distraction in advance so you can hyperfocus on your most important tasks. By removing every object of attention that's potentially more stimulating and attractive than what you intend to do, you give your brain no choice but to work on that task. I'm writing these words in my own distraction-free mode. To enter this mode and hyperfocus, I launch a distraction blocking app on my computer, which prevents me from accessing the websites that derail my productivity: email, social media sites, Amazon, and every other app and website I've specified on a block list. I specify the duration of time I want to hyperfocus, and if I do want to access any block sites during that period, I have to physically restart my computer. Since most of my work is done on a computer, this is easily the most important measure I take. I also put my computer in Do Not Disturb mode so I'm not distracted as notifications come in, put my phone in Do Not Disturb mode and keep it out of sight or in another room so I'm not tempted to check it, grab a coffee if I'm not going to bed in the next 10 hours, again, it takes caffeine an average of 8 to 14 hours to metabolize out of your system, and put on noise-canceling headphones so I'm not distracted by sounds in my environment. I don't always use them in my office or if I'm working out of a hotel room, but I'll do so without fail if I'm hyperfocusing on a plane or at a coffee shop. Which distractions derail your productivity over the course of a day? How many of them can you disable simultaneously with a blocking app or some other tactic? Write a quick plan, like the one above, that will guide you in dealing with these distractions ahead of time. When you find your attention getting derailed, reflect on what caused it so you can disable that distraction the next time around. For example, when I'm 83, distracted by a new website or app while in my distraction-free mode, I'll immediately add that site to my block list. Here are a few more suggestions for creating your distraction-free mode. There are many apps available that cut you off from distractions. A few of my favorites for computer. We're only beginning to understand how traits such are freedom, paid, though there's a free trial windows, as conscientiousness, neuroticism, and impulsiveness. Mac, iPhone, iPad, cold work together to determine how distractible we are. Turkey, free, though there's a these traits also determine how much stress the use of paid version Windows, Mac, distraction blockers may cause. If you find you become Android, and rescue time anxious with a blocker enabled, you may decide that, paid, though there's a free, you want to resort to using it only when you're working trial PC, Mac, Android, Linux. On a task that's especially onerous or when you have most of these cost a few dollars less energy, and therefore less of an ability to resist a month for the pro version, but distractions. You'll earn that money back in increased productivity. The research backs this up. People who deploy distraction blockers are more productive and focus for longer periods of time. If your workplace restricts what apps or plugins you can install on your computer, consider either unplugging the Ethernet cable or completely shutting off your computer's Wi-Fi. This sounds extreme, but we spend a lot of our internet time procrastinating. Get out of the office. If you work in a more flexible office environment, you might find a distraction-free mode can incorporate working out of the coffee shop downstairs or in a meeting room. Be thoughtful and don't underestimate, or overestimate, the social costs of your distraction-free mode. Consider the effects of shutting yourself off from your co-workers, especially if your workplace is a social environment. At the same time, don't overestimate the social costs. While you might feel guilty closing your email client for 30 minutes, remember that your clients and co-workers frequently wait an hour or two for you to respond when you're caught in meetings. This is a lesson I'm relearning constantly, As a general rule, your coworkers need you a lot less than you think they do. Treat yourself. After I've completed a hyperfocus session and I leave my distraction-free mode, I'll occasionally treat myself to an all-you-can-eat buffet of distractions. Research shows that the more impulsive you are, the more stressed you become by blocking yourself from distractions. If you do have little self-control, or if you're impulsive, indulging in the odd distraction break can be beneficial. Side note, impulsiveness is also the character trait most highly correlated with procrastination. I also usually indulge a cup of matcha or coffee before entering back into my distraction-free mode, which positively reinforces my behavior to focus more deeply. 84. Create a distraction-free mode for your team. Dale Partridge, author of People Over Profit, went as far as to equip his team with lamps and squirt guns to encourage them to focus when he was CEO of Sevenly. As he explained to me, one of the smartest things I did at Sevenly was to build custom walnut desk lamps for the entire team. They turned them on whenever they wanted to focus, and the rule was that no one was allowed to interrupt them when their lamp was on. All 45 employees were allowed to have up to 3 hours of uninterrupted focus time per day. We had to limit it because that uninterrupted time was so addictive. I also equipped everyone with a squirt gun they could spray each other with when they were interrupted. The intensity of your distraction-free mode depends on your work environment. If you work for yourself or have an office with a door, you likely have more flexibility in eliminating distractions. If you work in a collaborative open office environment, however, you may not be able to set up as strong a distraction-free mode as you'd like. Productivity is a process of understanding and adapting to your constraints. I always experience an odd and wonderful sense of relief when I enter my distraction-free mode, and I think you will too. Suddenly you don't have to tend to the news, your social media feeds, and a never-ending stream of email. You can relax, confident that you can no longer waste time and attention on mindless busy work. You accomplish meaningful work and hyperfocus for a longer period of time. And you know that because you're investing your time, attention, and energy into just one task, you can slow down and work more purposefully. A distraction-free mode also allows you to conserve energy. When you eliminate distractions, your energy goes further, and you can work for longer periods without needing a break. By disabling distractions ahead of time, you expend significantly less mental energy regulating your behavior in order to focus on your work. In turn, the less we have to regulate our behavior when we don't have to battle distractions or watch what we say as we deal with a difficult coworker, the more energy our work provides. Breaks are energizing for this same reason. They free a pocket of time in which we can press pause on regulating our behavior. You may find that even though you intended to hyperfocus for only a short amount of time, you have the energy to keep going long after. A distraction-free mode is especially valuable after a vacation or long weekend, as during these periods you'll have less energy and be more susceptible to distraction. Taming the distractions in your work ahead of time enables you to build up your energy as you settle back into your regular working rhythm. Working with reduced distractions. Because it's impossible to work in hyperfocus mode 100% of the time, we should also learn to enjoy the benefits of cutting back on distractions during other periods of our day. To figure out which ones are worth taming, ask yourself, what distractions interrupt your focus throughout the day that aren't worth losing 20 or more minutes of productivity over? It isn't possible to shut off these distractions entirely, and you might, 85, not even want to, but it is worth becoming more thoughtful about what interrupts your work. Email is a great example of a distraction that's important to tame but not eliminate. Email is a weird beast. It consumes a lot more attention than it does time. Meetings are the opposite, generally consuming more time than attention. Eliminating email would obviously not be realistic, but try to become more deliberate about when you check for messages. Doing so will allow you to regain control over your attention. Whenever you have email notifications enabled, you permit your coworkers to interrupt your focus on a whim. The instant you receive an email notification, you've lost control. Choosing when you check for messages ahead of time means you maintain control over your attention and resist slipping into autopilot mode. Setting a specific time to focus on distractions like email, meetings, your smartphone, and social media transforms them from distractions into merely other purposeful elements of your work and life. Technology should exist for our convenience, not for the convenience of anyone who wants to interrupt us. Countless things clamor for our attention over the course of a day. Below I've chosen 5 of the most common pain points: a constant flood of notifications, smartphones, and other distracting devices, email, meetings, and, finally, the internet. Notifications. An activity I recommended earlier in this book was to scroll through the notification settings on all of your devices and disable audible and vibrating alerts for interruptions you can safely live without. Leaving default settings turned on will flood you with a constant stream of interruptions. It's also worth limiting certain apps to interrupting you on only one device. There's no reason for your phone, tablet, watch, and computer to all inform you that you've received an email notifying you that your favorite clothing store is having a sale. Disabling most audible and vibrating alerts is a simple change, but one that's totally profound in practice. You suddenly get to choose when you're interrupted by your phone, rather than your phone deciding when to interrupt you. I personally just scan for new text messages and notifications when I check the clock on my phone. Every notification pulls you away from what you're doing and reminds you there's an entire digital world you're missing out on. Notifications are deceiving, for while it takes just a second to glance at one, that moment can suck you into a digital vortex in which you easily lose a half hour of your time and attention. Not many notifications are worth this productivity drain. That said, many notifications are worth receiving 100% of the time. Phone calls, for example. While I check my email just once a day, as I'll discuss below, I'll often turn on a notification for just one sender if I'm waiting for an important message. Doing this takes a minute or two, but I easily earn that time back in how much more deeply I'm able to focus. This lets me stop worrying and compulsively checking my inbox every few minutes. Setting up your email to receive notifications only for a group of VIP senders is also possible in most email applications and lets you decide who can interrupt you throughout the day. 86. As well as dealing with individual notifications, it's also possible to block when you allow apps to distract you. One of my favorite daily rituals is to put my smartphone and other devices in airplane mode between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. This is when I have the least energy and am more likely to fall victim to distractions. Plus, research shows we're less likely to multitask when we end our daily activities and go to bed early the night before. If enabling airplane mode feels too drastic, consider enabling your phone's Do Not Disturb mode while you work. Your smartphone, and other devices, apart from managing the notifications that your devices pop up, it's worth becoming deliberate about when, where, and how often you use those devices. Your phone is probably your most stimulating and novel object of attention, and you're absolutely going to be tempted by it, especially when the task you're working on becomes more intimidating or complex. Over time, I've changed my relationship with my phone. Instead of seeing it as a device that should stay attached to my hip for the entire day, I've started to regard it as a powerful, more annoying computer. Their cellular radios aside, our phones have the same parts as a computer, but for some reason, perhaps because they provide us with so much stimulation and validation throughout the day, we allow them to interrupt us constantly, infinitely more than our computers. We shouldn't give any shiny rectangular device so much power. Once I began viewing my smartphone as just a more distracting computer, I kept it stowed in my laptop bag instead of my pocket. And, most important, I made sure I had a good reason before checking it. This shift in attitude has enabled me to use my phone with intention, rather than on autopilot mode. Every time you pick up your phone without intent, you derail your attention for no good reason. Here are a few more strategies to prevent your phone, and other devices, from taking over your life. Mind the gaps. Resist the urge to tap around on your smartphone when you're waiting in line at the grocery store, walking to the coffee shop, or in the bathroom. Use these small breaks to reflect on what you're doing, to recharge, and to consider alternate approaches to your work and life. In these moments, mindlessly burning time on the phone isn't worth it. Doing so eliminates the valuable space in your schedule. Do a phone swap. Swap phones with a good friend or significant other when you're at dinner or hanging out. That way, if you have to look something up, make a call, or take a picture, you'll have a device to do it with, but one that won't suck you into a personalized world of distraction. Strategically use airplane mode. Flip your phone into airplane mode when working on an important task or having coffee with someone. It's impossible to share quality time without also sharing quality attention. Enabling airplane mode makes a bigger difference than merely putting your phone in your pocket, as in the latter case you're still aware that notifications and distractions are piling up and waiting for you. Airplane mode completely eliminates the possibility, 87, that a notification will disrupt your work. You can then deal with these alerts on your own terms later. Buy a second distractions device. This may sound a bit silly, but I recently bought an iPad that I use for one sole purpose, as a distractions device. I keep few social media apps, and no email app, on my phone and instead use my iPad for all things distracting. Delegating those tasks to the iPad which I leave in another room lets me focus for longer, and more deeply, in the event I do need to keep my smartphone by my side. Buying a tablet for this sole purpose is a sizable investment at first, but your attention is worth it. Create a mindless folder. Try housing your most distracting apps, the ones that pull you into autopilot mode, in a mindless folder on your phone or tablet. The folder's name will serve as an additional reminder that you're about to distract yourself. Prune your list of apps. Scroll through your phone and delete the apps on which you waste too much time and attention, social media and news apps included. Doing so can feel oddly refreshing, a sort of spring cleaning for your phone. Consider which apps duplicate functionality with those on your other devices. Your email app may not be worth keeping if you also access email on your tablet. An investment app you check compulsively might be worth deleting if you can access the same information on your laptop. In the last 30 years, more and more devices have crept into our lives. For me, the process started with my first laptop well over a decade ago. Later I bought a dumb feature phone and then an even more distracting smartphone. Next came an iPad and a fitness tracker. I'm sure there will be more devices in my future. This speaks to a trap we increasingly face, bringing new devices into our lives without first questioning their value. Clayton Christensen, a professor at Harvard Business School, developed a useful way of assessing the devices in your life. Question what jobs you hire devices to do for you. Every product we buy should do a job for us. We hire Kleenex to blow our nose, Uber to get from one place to another, OpenTable to book a table at a restaurant, Match.com to find a partner. We hire our phones to do a lot of these jobs, maybe more than any other product we own. We hire them to be an alarm clock, camera, timepiece, GPS navigator, video game console, email and messaging machine, boarding pass, music player, radio, subway pass, datebook, map, and so much more. It's no wonder we spend so much time on them. As we accumulate more devices, their jobs can become redundant. The only reason I have a tablet today is because I hire it as my distractions device. If I didn't need that particular service, it's likely I would have hired the tablet to do the exact same job done by my phone and computer helping me surf the web and using social media, and it would have been totally unnecessary. I recently got rid of my fitness tracker for this very reason. While it was a lot of fun at first, I couldn't remember what job I'd hired it to do. Several years back, I got rid of my TV and cable subscription for a similar reason. Netflix became my hire of choice for passive entertainment. 88. Before you buy another device, ask yourself, what jobs am I hiring it to do that the devices I already own can't? Thinking about your devices this way forces you to consider why you really own them and, perhaps even more important, enables you to bring devices into your life only with intention. Email in the knowledge economy. email is one of the largest distractions we face every day. It's usually the largest pain point for the people I speak to and coach, with meetings being a close second. One of the best strategies to tame email is to limit how many email notifications you receive, which limits how frequently you're interrupted. 64% of people use notifications with either audible or visual signals to alert them to new messages. If you fall into this category, you're probably spending too much time and attention on email. In addition to limiting new message alerts, here are 10 of my favorite email tactics. These will help you check your email more deliberately, and constrain how much time and attention you spend on it in the first place. Many of these strategies also work for other messaging apps, such as Slack. Check for new messages only if you have the time, attention, and energy to deal with whatever might have come in. This is a simple trigger that lets you make sure you can actually deal with new messages, instead of getting stressed by the new stuff to which you have to respond. Keep a tally of how often you check for messages. The average knowledge worker checks his email 11 times per hour, 88 times over the span of a day. It's hard to get any real work done with so many interruptions. The same study found that employees spend an average of just around 35 minutes on email per day, which means that email consumes much more attention than it does actual time. Once you become aware of how often you check for new messages, you'll likely want to reduce that amount of time because of the high cost of interruptions. Predecide when you'll check. Determining ahead of time when you'll check for new messages works wonders for reducing the number of times you open your email. 70% of emails are opened within the first 6 seconds of receipt, so shutting off notifications will help you work in a less agitated and reflexive way. I personally check new messages once a day at 3 p.m. and have an auto response that notifies people of this. If this frequency is unrealistic for your work, come up with a compatible number. As long as it's less than 88 times over the span of a workday, you'll be doing better than average. It helps to schedule these blocks of time on your calendar and set an auto response, both to make you feel more comfortable and to hold you socially accountable. If you still find email too tempting, enable a distraction blocker to cut yourself off. 84% of workers keep their email client open in the background as they work, but closing it will help you focus beyond the 40-second mark. 89. Hyperfocus on email. If you work in an environment that demands that you be highly responsive to emails, try hyperfocusing while answering your messages. Set a timer for 20 minutes, and in that time, blow through as many emails as you possibly can. Even if you receive an extraordinary number of messages, hyperfocusing on your inbox for 20 minutes, even as often as at the top of each hour, will enable you to get back to people quickly and allow you to still accomplish meaningful work the rest of the time. Plus, at most, the senders will have to wait only 40 to 60 minutes for a response. Limit points of contact. It takes only 10 seconds to carry out one of the most important productivity tactics, deleting the email app on your phone. I have an email app only on my distractions device and on my computer. Keep an external to-do list. Your email application is the worst possible place to keep a to-do list. It's distracting and overwhelming, and new stuff is constantly popping up, which makes it difficult to prioritize tasks and tell what's truly important. A task list where you simply keep a tally of what you have to get done today, preferably with your 3 daily intentions at the top, is simpler and much more powerful. While it takes an extra step to move your actionable emails to a separate list, doing so will leave you feeling much less overwhelmed and will enable you to better organize what's on your plate. Sign up for 2 email accounts. I have 2 email addresses, one that's public-facing, and a private one for my closest colleagues. While I check my public-facing account once a day, I batch check the other inbox a few times throughout the day. In select cases, this is a strategy worth adopting. Take an email holiday. If you're hunkering down on a big project, set up an autoresponder explaining that you're on a 1 or 2 day email holiday and that you're still in the office and can be reached by phone or in person for urgent requests. People are far more understanding of this strategy than you may think. Use the 5-sentence rule. In order to save your time and respect your email recipient's time, keep each message you write to 5 sentences or less, and add a note to your email signature explaining that you're doing so. If you feel the urge to write anything longer, use that as an opportunity to pick up the phone. This may save you from engaging in an unnecessarily protracted email exchange. Wait before sending important messages. Not every email is worth sending immediately. This is particularly true when you find yourself in an emotionally charged state when drafting a reply. Some responses, you might ultimately decide, aren't worth sending at all. For important messages, heated exchanges, or emails that require more thought, give yourself time to respond and let your mind wander to let new, better, and more creative ideas rise to the surface. 90. However we deal with it, email remains one of the most stressful elements of our work. One study that had participants go without email observed that after a period of just 1 week, their heart rate variability changed as they became significantly less stressed. The subjects interacted more often with people, spent longer working on tasks, multitasked less, and became much more focused. The absence of email allowed people to work slowly and more deliberately. When the experiment ended, participants described the experience as liberating, peaceful, and refreshing. While it would be impossible to get rid of email completely, try the tactics above and experiment with what works best for you. Meetings after email. Meetings are one of the biggest distractions we face throughout the day. They also consume an inordinate amount of time. A recent study found that, on average, knowledge workers spend 37% of their time in meetings, which means that if you work an 8-hour day, you typically spend 3 hours daily in meetings. Meetings are remarkably costly. Gather even a small group of people in a conference room for an hour, and you can easily lose an entire day's worth of work. That's not counting the time it takes everyone to switch his or her attention to and from what's being discussed. There's nothing inherently wrong with such gatherings, but pointless meetings are one of the largest productivity drains in the modern office. Here are 4 of my favorite ways to reel in the number of meetings you attend and make the ones you do take part in more productive. Never attend a meeting without an agenda. Ever. A meeting without an agenda is a meeting without a purpose. Whenever I'm invited to a meeting without an agenda, regardless of whom it's with, I'll ask for the objective. Very frequently, whoever scheduled it will find that the purpose can be accomplished with a couple of emails or a phone call. Push back on any meeting without an agenda. Your time is too valuable. Question every recurring meeting on your calendar. We often fail to question the value of routine meetings. Sift through the next month or 2 on your calendar, and consider which recurring meetings are truly worth your time and attention. Some may be more valuable than they seem on the surface, especially when they enable you to connect and learn more about what your team is doing, but just as many aren't. Some may be difficult to get out of, but taking a few minutes to gracefully ease your way out will save hours later on. Challenge the attendance list. Does everybody invited need to be there? The answer is usually no. If you're a manager or team leader, or just want to save someone time, let certain participants whose presence isn't critical know that while they're definitely welcome, their attendance is optional if they have something else important to work on. Hyperfocus on meetings. Engaging can be tough when meetings consume more of your time than they do your attention and energy. But if you do decide a meeting is worth attending, or you can't get out of it, enjoy it. Leave your phone or your computer behind and focus on what everyone is saying. 91. Contribute what you can, and whenever you can, help move things along so that everyone can leave early. You may end up getting a lot of value out of the meeting after all. Some of the best productivity strategies you'll adopt will seem obvious in hindsight, and I'd include the above suggestions in that category. Each of them is a matter of common sense. However, the great benefit of any productivity book, though, granted, I'm a bit biased, is that it allows you to step back from your work to notice what you could be doing differently. As the saying goes, common sense isn't always common action. The internet. Quite a few of the distractions I've discussed in this section have something in common. They stem from the internet. As powerful a tool as the internet is, it distracts and interrupts us and can lead us to spend a lot of time on autopilot mode. Just as our mind wanders while we work, we often surf the internet in active daydreaming mode, switching among websites and apps without intention. While reducing distractions and creating a distraction-free mode will go a long way toward helping you work with more intention, it's often worth taking this even a step further and disconnecting from the internet entirely. This can be beneficial not only at work. Being disconnected from the internet for a 12-hour period at home is nothing short of refreshing. When you're traveling, you'll never be so productive and invigorated as after you decide not to buy access to the internet on a bus or a plane. You spend about half of your online time procrastinating. The benefits of being connected often simply aren't worth how much longer everything takes. Don't just take my word for it, try disconnecting completely for a period of 24 hours this Sunday, and encourage your family to do the same. Instead of ponying up for internet access on the plane the next time you travel, work on an offline project that is important but not urgent. Reflect afterward. How restored do you feel? How much were you able to accomplish? If you're anything like me, you'll probably be motivated to limit your access to the internet in the future too. Simplifying your environment. Several years ago I worked in the recruitment department of a large company. One of my co-workers, Penny, kept a small bowl of jelly beans on her desk. This in and of itself wasn't remarkable, but what I did find remarkable was the fact that she ate almost none of them. It's not that she didn't like jelly beans, she just wasn't tempted that much by food. Each day she'd nibble at a few, leaving the rest for anyone who happened to stop by. I probably ate 90% of those jelly beans. Every time I walked by Penny's office, I'd grab a small handful of candy, an amount that was always, at least in my eyes, asymptotically close to the socially acceptable limit. If I had a similar bowl in my office, I, 92, don't think it would have lasted the afternoon. This past Friday, my fiancée and I hosted a party, and we had 2 bags of chips left over. I ate both within 2 days. My friends are often surprised when I share stories like this. As someone who researches and experiments with productivity as a full-time job, I'm pretty sure some of them expect me to have a superhuman level of self-control. But much as I do to resist digital distractions when writing, I try to deal with other temptations in my life ahead of time. Because food is my biggest weakness, I modify my external environment to avoid keeping any unhealthy snacks in the house, and if they are around, I ask someone to hide them. Whether with food or distractions, we're highly influenced by our external environment. Takeout menus stuck on your refrigerator are a reminder that tasty, unhealthy food is only a call away, just as keeping cut-up vegetables and hummus in the fridge will remind you to eat healthier. Posting your 3 daily intentions in a visible place will remind you to work on what's actually important throughout the day. Keeping a TV in your bedroom will remind you that a world of news and entertainment can be accessed with just the press of a button, an object of attention much more enticing than sleep. Facing your couches and chairs toward the TV, instead of toward one another, will have a similarly tempting effect. Leaving your phone on the table when eating breakfast will introduce an environmental cue that reminds you a world of distraction awaits. External environmental cues can affect us in remarkable ways. One study observed coffee shop patrons conversing with one another and discovered that those who kept their phone in front of them checked it every 3 to 5 minutes, regardless of whether it rang or buzzed. As the study put it, even when they are not in active use or buzzing, beeping, ringing, or flashing, our phones are representative of our wider social network and a portal to an immense compendium of information. Another study concluded, somewhat sadly, that the mere presence of a cell phone placed innocuously in the visual field of participants was found to interfere with closeness, connection, and relationship quality. So often these cues in our environment pull us away from what we intend to accomplish and, on a personal level, make our experiences less meaningful. Environmental cues don't actively interrupt us, like notifications, but they can do just as much harm to our productivity and personal life. This is especially the case when we look around for a novel distraction from a complex task. Our working environment should hold as few of these distracting cues as possible. When we keep our phone, tablet, and television in another room, we are derailed less often, become accustomed to working in a less stimulating environment, and ensure the environment around us is not more attractive than what we intend to focus on. By eliminating the novel cues in our working environment, we give ourselves the ability to focus for much longer. It's worth becoming deliberate about the cues you allow into your environment and questioning how they might affect your productivity. Since observing how much time and attention I waste on devices like my tablet and smartphone, I've rarely kept them in my external environment, unless they serve a purpose. My tablet is currently in another room, and my phone is on a table across my office, well out of reach. There's a lot of stuff in front of me: a meditation cushion, a pair, 93, of adjustable dumbbells, several plants, a cup of matcha tea, pictures of family, a fidget cube, a whiteboard, and my turtle, Edward, basking on her rock. These things won't derail my attention for long. They simply aren't that complex, so, unlike a smartphone, they can't completely hijack my attention. If I do get distracted by them, it's much easier to notice that my mind has wandered, and it's easier for me to get back on track. Novel objects of attention threaten to invade your attentional space and prevent you from focusing completely on any one thing. To modify your environment to be more conducive to working or living, you should eliminate objects of attention that will potentially derail your focus. Doing this is actually pretty simple, 94-1. Take stock of the distractions around you. This is especially important in the place where you focus on your most complex work. Make a list of all potential distractions, everything from the tablet you keep by your desk to a coworker sharing your cubicle. Then consider, which of these do you find more attractive than your work? 2. Distance yourself. Just as with distractions, it's not possible to tame all environmental cues in advance, but you can control most. Make a plan to remove attractive objects of attention from your environment so you're not tempted by them. 3. Introduce more productive cues into your environment. Not all environmental cues are bad, and no one wants to work in a sterile environment. Plants, for example, have been shown to have a calming effect. We evolved to feel good in nature, not in cubicles. Hanging a whiteboard in your environment may prompt you to brainstorm your thoughts and is a useful place to write your 3 daily intentions. Lining up your favorite books on an office shelf might remind you of ideas as you work. Keeping a fidget cube by your side is a cue to occasionally take a break, daydream, and consider new ideas. Having a book on your nightstand, instead of your phone, will encourage you to read more. Storing your fruit in a bowl on the table, instead of in your refrigerator, will prompt you to eat healthier. The cleanliness of your environment is also important. Make sure you tidy your. If you ask people in what place is their most space when you're done with it, coming home to a mess of dishes in the sink and productive, few will answer the office. In fact, most random objects strewn all over the floor, people will name any place but the office including, will instantly stress you out, reminding you their favorite coffee shop, an airport, the train, or their of all the things you still have to do. The home office. The reason for this, I'd argue, is that these same applies when you finish working. For environments contain fewer cues for all we have to get the day. Tidy the papers on your desk, done. We don't overhear co-workers chatting about the close the windows on your computer. Sort projects we're working on, we don't walk by the files on your desktop, and act on and meeting rooms where we regularly share progress. Archive each email you received that day. Reports. Mixing up where we work often lets us focus on when you sit down at your desk the next what we intend to accomplish, without distracting cues. Morning, you'll be able to focus immediately on your intentions, instead of becoming stressed about the previous day's progress. Decluttering your digital environment is just as important as decluttering your physical one. As you've probably found, environmental cues can also help our future selves. After I set my 3 overarching intentions for the following day at the end of the day prior, I write them on my whiteboard so they're what I see first thing in the morning. If I need to remember to bring a few documents to a meeting, I'll put them by the door so I see them as I leave. 95. Music. There are an awful lot of factors in the environment that affect focus. Even office temperature influences productivity to some degree. Before getting to how your internal, mental environment influences your productivity, I want to zero in on one more external factor. It may be something you work with already, music. While researching Hyperfocus, I interviewed one of the most renowned musicians of our time, one who has sold more music than Prince, Britney Spears, Justin Bieber, or Bob Dylan. The man has almost single-handedly crafted the soundtrack to countless childhoods, and his videos easily attract millions of YouTube views. However, while you may recognize his music, you likely won't know Jerry Martin's name. Jerry composed the music scores for video games such as The Sims and SimCity, games that have collectively sold well over 100 million copies worldwide. He's also created soundtracks for Apple, General Motors, and NBA commercials. Jerry's music is the perfect place to start when looking at how music influences productivity, as he has created some of the most productive soundtracks in existence. Research suggests that the most productive music has two main attributes. It sounds familiar. Because of this, music that is productive for you may differ from your co-workers' choices, and it's relatively simple. Jerry's music hits both of these notes. It sounds comfortably familiar, since it's heavily influenced by famous composers like George Gershwin. It contains no words to distract you, and it's simple. As Martin told me, when you put too much structure in music, you tend to focus on it. The best kind of music exists in the background. There's really not much going on when you listen closely. The music is linear, changing without you knowing it, and is supporting your work in the game. For my own part, I love writing to songs on repeat and have been listening to the same depressing Ed Sheeran tune for the last hour. However, research also suggests that the most productive music is relative. Music occupies at least some portion of attentional space, but it occupies less when it's familiar, simple, and also relatively quiet. As a result, music is no competition for a quiet environment when it comes to focus, but of course, music never exists in isolation. If you're working in a busy coffee shop, music may help obscure the conversations around you, which are much more complex and distracting than a simple and familiar melody. If a loud co-worker in the adjacent cubicle is on a telephone call, it's much more productive to throw on some noise-canceling headphones and listen to music. A study found that overhearing one side of a phone conversation is significantly more distracting than overhearing a regular dyadic conversation. Your brain works overtime to fill in the missing side of the half-a-log, so the conversation occupies more of your attentional space. For me, the quiet serenity offered by music on noise-canceling headphones on a loud flight is much less distracting than the roar of the plane's engine. When I'm at a coffee shop and they inexplicably switch the soundtrack to talk radio, I'll listen to music. Your own experience with how music affects your productivity will vary depending on the nature of your work, your working environment, and even your personality. Music impairs the performance of introverts more than extroverts, for example. However, generally speaking, if you're looking to focus, keep the music you listen to simple and familiar. 96. Clearing your mind. Of course, not all distractions are external, as we also keep a lot of distracting stuff in our heads. When writing a report, we remember we had a meeting that started 10 minutes ago. When we arrive home from work, we realize we forgot to stop to pick up bread. Clearing our head of these open loops is critical so they don't distract us in the moment as we're trying to focus. It's impossible to write about focus and productivity without citing David Allen's work. Allen is the author of Getting Things Done, a book with a simple premise, that our brain is for having ideas, not for holding them. An empty brain is a productive brain, and the more stuff we get out of our heads, the more clearly we think. You're already familiar with this idea if you keep a calendar. You'd never be able to think clearly if you tried to keep track of all of your appointments and meetings in your head. You'd forever need to devote some portion of your attentional space to upcoming events, and this would be extraordinarily stressful. Keeping a to-do list has a similar effect. Each task you get out of your head and onto the list is a task that won't pester you as you're working on something else. You'll be able to think more clearly and you'll experience less guilt about what you're working on as a result. Something remarkable happens when you externalize tasks and commitments. You work with almost no guilt, worry, or doubt. You experience guilt when you feel tension about your past, worry when you feel tension about your future, and doubt and stress when you feel tension about the present moment. These feelings evaporate when you set intentions and make a rough plan for how you'll complete your important tasks. You'll think more clearly too. Externalizing what's on your mind means tasks and commitments won't pop into your attentional space as you're working. Maintaining a calendar or a to-do list turns internal distractions into external cues. You no longer need to keep in mind that you have a meeting. Your calendar app will do that for you. You don't need to remember to work on what's important. The task list on your desk acts as a cue to remind you of what you need to get done, especially when you keep your most important daily intentions at the top. This concept extends far beyond your tasks and appointments. Keeping a distractions list as you focus will remove distractions from your head so you can refocus more quickly and deal with them later. See Chapter 0.5. If you're a worrier, create a list of everything weighing on your mind, while scheduling a time to consider the validity of each of the entries. Capturing ideas that come to you as you let your mind rest and wander will mean you can make use of them later. Regularly reviewing a list of everything you're waiting for, one that records the important emails, letters, packages, and phone calls you're expecting, will get these things off your mind, too. Some people can get by with the bare minimum, keeping a to-do list and a calendar, and find additional lists cumbersome. Others find they think most clearly when they capture every little thing weighing on their minds. I personally fall somewhere in between. Feel out your own threshold, start with setting a few intentions each day, and keep a to-do list and a calendar. Unresolved mental loops can tug at your attention throughout the day, especially when you're immersed in your most important work. 97. Begin closing these open loops so you can focus, and hyperfocus, more easily on your work. Continuously capture unresolved commitments and ideas as they come up, and get into a habit of revisiting them at a set time later. This will free up a lot of attentional space to spend on better things. Working with purpose here is a fundamental truth about focus. Your brain will invariably resist more complex tasks, especially when you're first starting them, and when it does, you'll look around for more novel and stimulating things to do instead. When you clear your working environment of interruptions, distractions, and cues that will tempt you away from what you intend to accomplish in the moment, you'll stay on track. This chapter was long for a simple reason: there's a lot of brush you need to clear before you can hyperfocus. Recall the 3 measures we can use to measure the quality of our attention: how much time we spend working with intention, how long we're able to focus on one task, and how long our mind wanders before we catch it doing so. All 3 measures are supported by the tactics in this chapter. Creating a distraction-free mode lets you carve out time to spend intentionally while eliminating the more attractive objects of attention that would ordinarily derail your focus. Working with fewer distractions in general lets you eliminate novel objects of attention throughout the day and reclaim more of your attention for what's important. Utilizing both of these working modes helps you train your brain to wander less and focus longer. Simplifying your working and living environments eliminates a slew of tempting distractions. Clearing your head of distracting open loops lets you work more clearly and frees even more attentional space for your most productive tasks. One final benefit of eliminating distractions in advance is gaining the freedom to work at a slower, more purposeful pace. One study, for example, found that when we text while reading something, it can take us anywhere from 22% to 59% longer to read the same passage. It doesn't matter if you work at a slower, more deliberate pace if you're continuously working in the right direction. What you lose in speed you make up for in intentionality. Carving out more attentional space for what you're doing also enables you to work with greater awareness of what distractions you're resisting, how you feel about your work, how much energy you have, and whether you need to recharge. In addition, you will actually notice temptations and impulses that arise, so you'll fall victim to them less often in the future. So far we've covered the 4 stages of hyperfocus: choosing an object of attention, eliminating distractions, focusing on a task, and getting back on track. 98. Now let's talk about how you can make a habit out of setting the stage for this super productive state of mind by increasing the size of your attentional space and overcoming your resistance to hyperfocus. 99, 100, 101. Chapter 5: Making Hyperfocus a Habit. What makes our minds wander? There is a wealth of research that examines why our mind wanders at the exact time we're trying to focus. It does so significantly more when we're feeling stressed or bored, we're working in a chaotic environment, we're dealing with and thinking about a number of personal concerns, we're questioning whether we're working on the most productive or meaningful task, or we have unused attentional space. The more we have, the more prone we are to mind-wandering episodes. Conveniently, we've already discussed these factors. Feeling stressed or bored, we experience stress when the demands of a situation exceed our ability to cope with them. By preventing attentional space overload, we ensure we have the resources needed to cope with such conditions. Working in a chaotic environment, I define boredom as the restlessness we feel as we transition from a state of high stimulation to a lower one. In becoming accustomed to experiencing less stimulation over time by enabling our distraction-free mode whenever we hyperfocus, and by working with fewer distractions in general, we face the stimulation gap less often, experience boredom less frequently, and make our environment less chaotic by default. Thinking about personal concerns, capturing our mind's open loops through a task list, a waiting for list, or even a worry list prevents unresolved items from weighing on our mind as we try to focus. This helps us deal better with chaotic environments and set aside personal concerns. Switching tasks less frequently also helps us think more clearly. We experience less attentional residue, which can take a toll on our limited attentional space. Questioning whether we're working on the best thing, working with intention is the best way to experience fewer feelings of doubt about what we should or could be doing in any one moment. These feelings lead our minds to wander from what we're trying to focus on. Amount of unused attentional space. Deploying hyperfocus to work on our most complex tasks will consume more attentional space by default, which will in turn prevent our mind from wandering. The smaller the object of attention, the more likely mental wandering will occur. The tactics in this book work for a few main reasons. While they all enable you to focus more deeply, they also safeguard your mind from wandering in the first place. Later in the book we'll examine a few other factors that lead your mind to wander. 102, including how tired you are and how happy you feel. Your happiness level can impact your attention in many curious ways. For now, though, let's dive deeper into the mind-wandering factor I personally find most interesting: the attentional space we have to spare. The power of making your work harder depending on their complexity. Tasks will require varying amounts of your attentional space. If you've ever tried to meditate and focus only on your breath for a few minutes, you might have noticed your mind wanders more than usual, far more than when you're going for a run, carrying on a deep conversation, or watching a movie. These latter tasks are more complex and fill more of your attentional space by default. Consciously making your tasks more complex, and taking on more complex ones, is another powerful way to enter into a hyper-focused state, as they will consume more of your attention. This will keep you more engaged in what you're doing and lead your mind to wander less often. In his groundbreaking book Flow, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi offers intriguing insights about when we're most likely to enter into a flow state, when the challenge of completing a task is roughly equal to our ability to do so, and we become totally immersed in the task. When our skills greatly exceed the demands of a task, such as when we do mindless data entry for several hours, we feel bored. When the demands of a task exceed our skills, such as when we're unprepared to give a presentation, we feel anxious. When the demands of a task are roughly equal to our ability to do that task, when we're playing an instrument, immersed in a book, or skiing down a freshly powdered slope, we're a lot more likely to be fully engaged in what we're doing. If you find it difficult to become immersed in your work throughout the day, It's worth questioning whether your tasks are difficult and complex enough. If you're frequently bored, consider whether your job takes advantage of your unique skill set. If your mind is still frequently wandering, even after implementing the ideas in the previous chapters, it's a pretty good sign your tasks aren't complex enough and don't consume enough of your attentional space. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you find you're anxious at work even after taming distractions and working with more intention, consider whether your current skills are a good match for the tasks at hand. Outside of questioning individual tasks, it's also worth reflecting on how challenging you find your workload in general. The tactics in Hyperfocus will allow you to accomplish more in less time, but you may then find you don't have enough work remaining to fill that extra time. This can manifest itself in some odd ways. Our work tends to expand to fit the available completion time in productivity circles. This phenomenon is known as Parkinson's law. But by disabling distractions in advance, you may find the same thing I did. Your work no longer expands to fit the time you have available for its completion, and you discover how much work you truly have on your plate. Some executives I coach find they're able to accomplish a full day's work in just a few hours when they focus on only their most consequential tasks. 103. I discovered this phenomenon firsthand with my last book. After handing in the 80,000-word manuscript, which I wrote in a relatively short amount of time, I continued to be just as busy even though I had substantially less work. My remaining projects expanded to fit the time I had available. Instead of planning for speaking engagements a few weeks before they were scheduled, I began to think about them much further in advance, far earlier than I needed to. I logged into my social media accounts more often, when I should have been working. I stopped following my own advice and checked for new emails constantly instead of once a day. I enabled more notifications and alerts so I would have more tasks to tend to. And I agreed to more meetings, many of which I didn't need to attend in the first place. I experienced a dreaded feeling of guilt whenever I wasn't busy, which, of course, disappeared as soon as I did more busy work. Little did I know that this guilt had two sources, a lack of working with intent and my work expanding to fill how much time I had for it. It took several months before I finally stepped back to tame the novel distractions that were flooding my available time. In doing so, I discovered how little work I actually had on my plate. In response, I intentionally took on more meaningful tasks, writing more for my website, thinking about this book, and ramping up my speaking and coaching sessions. Because I think of myself as a pretty productive guy, my failure was tough to admit to myself, but it taught me an essential lesson. Doing mindless stuff at work or at home is not only unproductive but also a sign you don't have enough important work. This also accounts for why busy work gets set aside when you're on deadline. There's no time available to contain its expansion. To measure if you have enough work in general, assess how much of your day you spend doing unproductive busy work. If you're high on the busy work scale, you may have room to take on significantly more tasks and become more engaged and productive in the process. This advice is counterintuitive, and the very idea may turn you off if you already feel you're working at capacity. But it's worth considering. When we do knowledge work for a living, we procrastinate, spending time and attention on email and social media, tasks that make us feel productive in our work but lead us to accomplish little. A note on rote tasks. While rote work is often less productive than complex tasks, it is redeeming in one way: it's usually more fun. Studies show we prefer mundane tasks like data entry over more complex tasks like writing reports. In writing this book, I visited Microsoft's research department, which conducts many studies on how we manage our attention. On each of my 3 trips there, the staff was adamant in confirming that we're happier doing tasks that don't consume our complete attention. This makes sense. While our productive tasks are important, they're usually also more aversive, which is why we're usually well compensated to do them. They take advantage of our unique mental resources. At the same time, mindless work can give us immediate feedback and the sense of having accomplished something. If certain rote tasks bring you genuine enjoyment, don't let a productivity book make you stop doing them. but do eliminate some to carve out more time and attention for significant tasks. 104. Increasing the size of your attentional space. Most of the focus strategies I've discussed so far involve becoming a better custodian of your attentional space. In addition to more deliberately managing it, you can also increase its size. To recap, the size of attentional space is determined by a measure that cognitive psychology refers to as working memory capacity. How many pieces of data you can hold in your mind simultaneously, usually about 4 chunks of information. The greater your working memory capacity, the more information you can hold at the same time and the greater your ability to process complex tasks. As well as allowing you to take on more complex tasks, expanding your attentional space offers other benefits. A higher working memory capacity has been shown to reduce mind wandering when you're focused on complex tasks. When your mind does wander, it actually wanders more productively. The larger the size of your attentional space, the more likely you are to think about, and plan for, the future. Even better, a larger attentional space means you'll have extra attention to think about what you'll work on next, while keeping your original intention in mind. A larger attentional space also helps you get back on track quicker after your mind wanders or you become distracted. One study expressed this memorably when it stated that possessing a greater working memory capacity enables you to take full advantage of these underutilized resources and return to your favored mental destination. So how exactly do you expand the size of your attentional space? There are many brain training apps and websites that promise to build memory and attention. Simply put, most of their claims are dubious. In laboratory studies, they simply don't hold water. While a few brain training programs work in the short term and help you remember a bit more and problem solve a bit better, their impact ends there. You have to stick with them for several hours a week in order for them to continue working, and as soon as you stop, you lose the gains you've made. One study measured the effectiveness of these programs across a sample size of 11,430 participants. It found no evidence that the apps worked, even when the tasks they measured were the ones they were designed to improve. There is, however, one practice that has been proven in study after study to increase working memory capacity: meditation. Meditation gets a bad rap and often conjures images of a monk meditating in a cave. In practice, it's actually quite simple. Like hyperfocus, meditation involves continually returning your focus to a single object of attention, usually your breath, as soon as you notice your mind has wandered from it. In breathing meditation, the most common form, and the one I personally practiced for about a decade, you notice the characteristics of your breath, how deeply it ebbs and flows, its temperature, where it is most prominent in your body, how your in-breath transitions to your out-breath, and so on. Since observing your breath doesn't consume your full attention, your mind will wander constantly, which is somewhat the point. Each time you return your wandering mind to the details of your breath, you heighten your executive functioning, how much control you have over your attention. This eventually enables you to improve each measure of the quality of your attention. 105. You'll be able to focus for longer, your mind will wander less, and you'll be able to work with greater intention. You experience the same benefit during hyperfocus. Like meditation, hyperfocus is a practice that compounds upon itself. The more you practice, the more you learn to manage your attention and the longer you're able to focus the next time around. Meditation is simple. Sit somewhere with your eyes closed and pay attention to your breath. It's natural to feel as if you're doing it wrong, especially at first, but don't overthink it. The effects of this simple practice are actually profound. One study discovered that when participants developed a meditation practice, not only did their minds wander less, but they could also focus for longer. Before that happened, 2 measures of the quality of attention. This study introduced meditation to students studying for the GREA standardized graduate admissions test in the United States. When it came time for them to take the test, their scores rose an average of 16%. Meditation has also been shown to prevent the deterioration of working memory capacity during periods of high stress, such as working in a chaotic environment or dealing with personal concerns. One review of the literature on the subject described meditation's benefits most succinctly, calling it the most validated technique for minimizing the disruptive effects of mind wandering. My favorite study of meditation measured how much participants' working memory capacity increased when they had an active meditation practice. The researchers guided participants through a 45-minute meditation exercise twice a week and encouraged them to meditate at home. A few weeks later they discovered something incredible in the working memory capacity of everyone who meditated. It increased by an average of more than 30%. That was significantly more than that of two other groups of subjects in the study, one of which practiced yoga for several weeks. This effect was also observed after a period of just a few weeks. To begin meditating requires just a few minutes each day. Start by determining your resistance level, as you do before hyperfocusing on a task. Then sit in a chair, in a comfortable but upright posture so the discs of your spine are stacked one on top of another. Notice the qualities of your breath and refocus on them whenever your mind wanders. I highly recommend using an app to get started. I like Headspace and Insight Timer, which both feature guided meditations to help you get started. Approach each meditation session with a genuine curiosity about where your mind will wander. My meditation rule is simple, and one I've stuck with for years: it doesn't matter how long I meditate, as long as I do so each day. Some days I can spare only a minute or two, which is sufficient as long as I keep faithful to a routine. When I began a decade ago, I did only 5-minute sessions, and since then have slowly built to 30 minutes. I wouldn't give it up for anything. When you practice being with your breath, you practice being with your life. But meditation is not the only tool in this toolkit. Practicing mindfulness is another proven way to increase the size of your attentional space. It's similar to meditation but a little less intimidating. Mindfulness is about becoming conscious of what is filling your mind and noticing the circumstances of the current moment. This includes noting anything you happen to be perceiving, feeling, or thinking. Mindfulness differs from hyperfocus in one major, 106, respect. It's about focusing on the circumstances of the present, rather than becoming immersed in them. Here's a statement that might sound strange: you've never really taken a shower. While you might stand there while the water washes over you, your mind is usually elsewhere at the office, running through your daily checklist, thinking about what you need to buy for dinner, or brainstorming about a problem you're facing at work. While a small part of it runs through the habit sequence of taking a shower, your mind isn't with you, present with what you're experiencing. A mindful shower is one in which you focus on the sights, sounds, and sensations of the present, which enables you to train your brain to better focus on what's in front of you. Begin to practice mindfulness by choosing one daily task that doesn't consume your complete attention: sipping your morning coffee, walking through your office, or taking a shower, and intentionally be with that experience for a minute or two. Anchor your attention to the circumstances of the present moment. Notice the smell, taste, and feeling of a cup of coffee, the momentum shifts in your body as you walk from one room in the office to another, or the temperature and sensations of taking a shower. You can set a timer or not. Simply be with the circumstances of the present moment and notice as much as you can about what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling. When you find yourself becoming lost in thought, bring your mind back to what you originally intended to focus on and laugh at how difficult it can be to tame. Don't be hard on yourself when your mind wanders. Remember, your brain was built to do this. Here's the key: the smaller the object of attention, the more your mind will wander, but the more you'll expand the size of your attentional space as you focus on it. The more quickly you're able to get back on track after your mind ventures off during a mindfulness or meditation session, the better you'll become at focusing at work and at home. 107. Practices like meditation and mindfulness are also powerful because they train you to practice holding a single intention in your mind for a given period of time. During your meditation, you sit with the intention of being with your breath until your timer goes off. 108. The same is true when you practice mindfulness, until the coffee cup is empty, or half full, your shower is finished, or you're done walking to where you intend to go. you focus on what you're doing then and there. When you keep a single intention in mind, you're able to live and work more intentionally for the rest of the day too. And because both meditation and mindfulness increase the size of your attentional space, both practices make you more likely to maintain intentions. As if these benefits weren't enough, meditation and mindfulness also help you step back from your thoughts. This makes it infinitely easier to check what's occupying your attentional space. The more you notice what's grasped your attention, the more quickly you'll be able to redirect it to your intention. With enough awareness, you might even notice your mind has wandered to somewhere productive and you want to continue that train of thought. For example, a higher working memory capacity means your mind is more likely to make plans and set intentions for the future. With this extra awareness, you gain the power to notice stray objects of attention at the edges of your attentional space, such as when you're seeking external stimulation or about to fall victim to a seductive distraction. The research is clear: mindfulness and meditation improve virtually every aspect of how you manage your attention. Every once in a while, I like to travel to a local Buddhist monastery to join a public Saturday afternoon meditation. This usually consists of a potluck and an hour-long meditation session, followed by a talk given by one of the monks. During one of my visits, a monk spoke about how for several weeks during his meditation practice he focused solely on the sensation his breath made on the tip of his nose, an impossibly small object of attention. I tried doing the same during an extended 2-hour meditation practice the next day, and my mind has never wandered so much. With an object of attention that small, it's no surprise. But the following Monday morning, I focused more deeply on my work than I had in weeks. I wrote several thousand words in just a few hours, brainstormed 3 talks, and had time left over to clear my email inboxes. The positive effects lingered beyond that day, as I was able to focus better throughout the week. The quality of attention is so integral to productivity that increasing it even slightly makes a remarkable difference in how much we accomplish. Luckily, you don't have to spend hours focusing on the tip of your nose to experience the remarkable benefits of mindfulness and meditation. Even only a few minutes a day will help immensely. If you take away one lesson from this chapter, it should be that few practices will improve the quality of your attention and the size of your attentional space more than meditation and mindfulness. While both will consume some of your time, you'll make that time back, and then some, in how much more clearly, deeply, and deliberately you'll think and focus. Hyperfocus at home. Almost every idea in this book will help you not only at work but at home too. As I put these ideas into practice, I've noticed some remarkable benefits in my personal life. 109. Chances are you were in hyperfocus mode during your last highly productive work period. You were likely in a similar state the last time you felt happiest and energized at home. You were probably focused on just one thing, whether that was carrying on a meaningful conversation with a loved one, planting a garden, playing cards with a relative, or relaxing with a book on the beach. The one thing you were doing consumed your full attentional space. Because of this, you likely didn't have many surrounding distractions. Your work phone may have been in the other room, and you may have made a commitment to disconnect for the weekend. Your family may have agreed to a phone-free dinner. You were probably also in a more relaxed state and, because of this, didn't seek novel stimuli in your environment. You could focus with relative ease on what you were doing. Hyperfocus was the best term I could come up with to describe the state of being totally focused on one thing, though it does have the disadvantage of sounding dauntingly intense. In practice, hyperfocus is actually quite relaxed, unless you're on a deadline or are working at or above capacity, so your work doesn't have the luxury of expanding to fit an amount of time. When you hyperfocus, you're surrounded by very few novel objects of attention, and what you're doing fills your attentional space quite naturally. This same idea holds true at home, and we experience the same benefits of hyperfocus there. We remember more of what we're doing, and our experiences become more meaningful as a result. We spend more time in the moment and get things done more quickly and with less effort. I like to do this by setting 3 personal daily intentions in addition to my 3 work goals, even if one happens to be binge-watching a show on Netflix. One area I've noticed that particularly benefits from hyperfocus is conversations. The secret to deep, meaningful conversations is simple: bring your complete attention to the person you're speaking with. You can do this in many ways, such as by allowing someone to finish talking before you start, a simple but highly underutilized technique. Wait until you hear the period at the end of their sentence before you think about what you'll say next. I'm convinced that most people have a sixth sense and can tell when you're truly paying attention to them. It's a remarkable thing when you spend not just quality time with someone but quality attention as well. Hyperfocus lets me dive deeper into my personal relationships, in conversation, and other aspects. I'm convinced that love is nothing more than sharing quality attention with someone. As David Augsburger, a Baptist minister and author, has put it, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. When we're hyperfocusing on an activity at home, whether it's playing an instrument, walking the dog, or making dinner for the family, disabling the pointless, novel distractions and focusing completely on what we're doing means we are purposefully disengaging from our work. This practice gets easier with time. I've devoted an entire later chapter of this book to recharging hyperfocus. We can do this by periodically stepping back from our work to let our mind rest, wander, and take on less challenging tasks. Spending our time at home more purposefully also enables us to feel recharged. 110. Whether at work or at home, the quality of your attention determines the quality of your life. At work, the more attention you give to what's in front of you, the more productive you become. At home, the more attention you devote to what's in front of you, the more meaningful your life becomes. 4. More ways to battle your resistance to hyperfocus. This chapter covers a number of tactics that will help you develop an even stronger hyperfocus habit, making your work more challenging, taking on more projects at work and at home, increasing the size of your attentional space, practicing hyperfocus in all areas of life, and choosing exactly when to hyperfocus. Let's end with one final, important concept that will help you to solidify a hyperfocus ritual in your work and life: how to battle your inevitable resistance to the mode. Assuming you've already given hyperfocus a try, even if only for 10 minutes, you may have felt what I did at first, a mental resistance to focusing on just one thing. This was probably a mixture of restlessness, anxiousness, and succumbing to novel distractions. You likely found yourself craving these distractions more than usual in the initial stage of entering the hyperfocused state. This resistance we feel toward complex and productive tasks isn't distributed evenly across working time. It's usually concentrated at the beginning of when we start these tasks. For example, while it might take weeks to summon the energy and stamina needed to clean the garage or bedroom closet, once we do it for even just a minute, we could keep going for hours. The same is true for working out. After we overcome our resistance to getting started, we can go on with the rest of our workout. Starting provides enough momentum to carry out our intentions. This is true of our most complex tasks as well, and is one of the many reasons we'll work on a task for only 40 seconds before falling victim to distractions. We feel the most resistance at the very start and search instead for more attractive alternatives. When we begin a new task, working on it for at least 1 minute with purposeful attention and limited distractions is critical. Here are my 4 favorite strategies for battling this initial resistance. 1. Shrink your desired hyperfocus period until you no longer feel resistance to the ritual. Minimize the amount of time you'll dedicate to focusing on one task until you no longer feel mental resistance to it. Even setting a mental deadline of 5 minutes will likely be enough to get you started. 111-2. Notice when you don't have time for something. You always have time, you just spend it on other things. When you find yourself saying this familiar statement, try doing a task swap. For example, if you don't have the time to catch up with a friend over coffee, ask yourself whether you'd have an equal amount of time to watch the football game or surf Facebook. If you feel you don't have time to take something on, ask yourself whether you could free up your schedule enough to meet with your boss or clean your inbox. If the task swap shows you do have the time, chances are this is just your resistance talking. 3. Continually practice hyperfocus. Incorporate at least one hyperfocus interval each day. You'll experience less resistance as you get accustomed to working with fewer distractions and appreciate how productive you've become. 4. Recharge. Hyperfocus can be oddly energizing. You spend less energy regulating your behavior when you don't have to continually resist distractions and push yourself to focus on what's important. That said, resisting the ritual can also be a sign you need to recharge. The power of hyperfocus. Every idea in hyperfocus is designed to help you more deliberately manage your attention, an essential idea when our attention is so limited and in demand. Let's recap a few of these ideas. Understanding the 4 types of productive and unproductive work tasks lets us step back and figure out what's actually important so we can stop working on mindless autopilot mode. Recognizing the limits of our attention enables us to become aware of how few things we're able to focus on in the moment. Hyperfocusing on our most complex, productive tasks lets us activate the most productive mode of our brains and get a large amount accomplished in a short amount of time. Setting strong daily intentions lets us work on our most productive tasks. Creating a personalized distraction-free mode, and a reduced distractions mode, lets us work with more focus and clarity while directing our time and attention away from needless distractions. Simplifying our working and living environments lets us think more clearly by taking stock of the distractions that surround us. Clearing our minds using waiting for, task, and worry lists lets us work with clarity and prevents unresolved mental loops from interrupting our focus throughout the day. Becoming good custodians of our attentional space by making our work more complex when necessary and by expanding the limits of our attention helps us properly manage our limited attention. In the beginning of this book you may recall that I made a few lofty claims about how transformative it can be to purposefully manage your attention. If you've acted upon the 112 advice so far, I think you'll find what I did, that your work and your life have been positively changed as a result of this practice. As you've acted upon the advice in the first 5 chapters, I hope you've already become more productive, more engaged with your work and life, and a clearer and calmer thinker. You probably also remember more and view your work and life as more meaningful. All 3 measures of the quality of your attention have also likely increased. You spend more of your time deliberately, you are able to focus longer in one sitting, and your mind doesn't wander from your intentions nearly as much. There is a wealth of research on how we can best focus, and in the first 5 chapters I've done my best to summarize it in a way that is both practical and tactical. I hope you'll agree, attention is the most important ingredient we have to living a good, productive life. The power of mind wandering. To this point in the book I've discussed only the negative effects of a wandering mind. At times when we need to focus, these mental strolls can undermine our productivity. However, this mind-wandering mode when we scatter our attention and focus can also be immensely powerful. In fact, it's so powerful that I've devoted the second part of hyperfocus to it. I call this mode scatterfocus, because in it, our attention scatters to focus on nothing in particular. While hyperfocus involves directing your attention outward, scatterfocus is about directing it inward, inside your own mind. Just as hyperfocus is the most productive mode of the brain, scatterfocus is the most creative. Scatterfocus can derail our productivity when our original intent is to focus, but when we're coming up with a creative solution to a problem, planning for our future, or making a difficult decision, it is just as essential as hyperfocus. We can harness the remarkable benefits of scatterfocus by practicing intentional mind wandering. Learning how to use each mode intelligently will make you more productive, creative, and happy. Let's dive into the second mental mode now.